I'm going to do what I do every time I enter my... The mic's not working? Is it working now? Yeah. All right. So I'm going to do what I do every morning when I enter my class. What did I say? Is there any student here that remember that? I enter the class and I say, "Good morning, America!" And some of the students don't relate to that movie that inspired me a couple of decades ago, or more than a couple. Anyway, thank you so much. Welcome to the 19th International Symposium on Online Journalism. I am Rosenthal Alves. I started doing this annual gathering here in 1999, and we have been following the evolution of online journalism and the creation of a new media environment that we knew since the 90s or the 80s that it would come and would be very transformative for our news industry. This morning I start in a very sad note because a journalist from Ecuador has just told me that 3 Ecuadorian journalists who had been kidnapped in Colombia have been assassinated, and we are very sad with that. You know that the ISOJ is organized by the Knight Center for Journalism in the Americas at the School of Journalism in the Moody College here at UT, and we have been for many years following this problem of violence against journalists in the region, around the world actually, and I'm a little moved, like I am always when we in the Knight Center report this kind of news, and but I wanted to thank everybody, like my friends from Ecuador who are here, and friends from 42 countries. We counted 42 countries. This is a very special conference, not only because we bring here speakers from all over the world, from all over the country, but also because the attendees in this conference are also superstars. You know, I really encourage you to meet each other and to hear about the stories of journalists all over the world who are using digital technology to create a new kind of journalism. One of the characteristics of this conference has been exactly mixing the industry with the academia. And this year we have a very strong research component also, as you're going to see in a while. But first I want to invite the Dean of the Moody College of Communication, Jay Bernhardt, to come here and welcome you on behalf of the university and the Moody College. Thank you.
Good morning. Good morning, everybody. Is my mic on? Can you hear me up there? Yeah, great, great. Well, good morning. It's really great to see you. It's great that all of you could come from, especially I was thrilled to hear people are here from 42 different countries, so that's amazing. This is the 19th annual ISOJ, which is amazing. And it gets better and better every year, and it's because of Rosenthal, of course. Let's give Rosenthal a big hand for, we salute you. We salute you and your amazing staff and all the people who helped make this possible. So I'm giving you official welcome. Welcome to the Blanton Museum. Welcome to the University of Texas at Austin on behalf of the Moody College of Communication, where I'm dean. Also, welcome to the great city of Austin. If you've never been here before, our official bird is the crane, as you've probably seen. We're growing like crazy, and it's a booming city in many respects. And a big part of what's making Austin booming is media and growth in new media and innovative media. And it's an exciting time to be here and exciting time to welcome all of you to the conference. I want to take a moment and personally thank all the sponsors of today's event. I want to make sure I get them all. You see them on the behind me, but of course the Knight Foundation, the Open Society Foundation, Univision, Facebook, Google, and the Dallas Morning News, especially Dallas Morning News. And you'll hear shortly from Jim Maroney, their longtime publisher and good friend of mine, who I'm always delighted to be on a podium or panel with Jim, not least of which because he's a great leader and innovator in this field, but also because he co-chaired the committee that hired me. So I'm always delighted. Welcome, Jim, and thanks for being here. And let's clap for Jim Maroney. So just a couple quick words about Moody College and about what we're working on, our School of Journalism. We're really thrilled, and I don't know if this has been shared already or not, but we're really thrilled to announce our incoming school director, Dr. Kathleen McElroy, and she's here somewhere. So hopefully if you haven't had a chance to meet her before, you'll get a chance to meet her while you're here this week. We have a couple other really great, I'm not going to share names yet, but we have several other amazingly talented hires starting in our School of Journalism this upcoming fall and this upcoming year. Our schools and our program is I think as good as it's ever been, maybe tracking in a terrific direction, in large part because of the emphasis on issues like what comes up at ISOJ and out of the Knight Center for Journalism in the Americas. So we hope that you'll stay in touch with us all year round and consider sending students our way and keeping us in your minds as potential partners and collaborators for different work. The last thing I want to say is that what's particularly important is that these issues, the issues that you talk about here today and over the next few days are, it's cliche to say it, but it's perfectly true that these issues and the discussions you're having are more important than ever. In the society we live in the U.S. and around the world, issues of journalist safety, issues of how do we separate fact from fiction, how do we help people understand what is true, what sources are credible, how do we, I'm a health communication scientist myself, and I struggle with the fact that there's an erosion of belief in science and fact and medicine, in climate and all these issues, and you all are our only hope, our best hope to addressing some of these issues. And society depends on it, democracy depends on it, humanity depends on it. So it's incredibly important. So I salute all of you for your work. I salute Rosenthal and the Knight Center here for all of the things that you all do to help share best practices in these areas so we can all be more effective. And so with that, I just really, again, delighted to welcome you here. Hope you have a great conference, and we'll talk to you more soon. Thank you.
Introduce yourself.
Good morning, everybody. Hopefully everyone's all ready to go with their caffeine and had some nice breakfast already. We just want to welcome you again to this 19th year of ISOJ. It's fantastic to see all of you here from so many parts of the world. As Rosenthal said, this is such a unique conference in the sense that we have this intersection between the practitioners and the Academy. And we have a fantastic set of panels today and tomorrow that are exploring the habits of thought, our guest-edited special theme issue this year with Dr. Jane Singer. So we're very excited to share those special panels with you today and tomorrow. And we'll just go ahead and kick things off. Thank you so much for being here.
Okay. Almost ready. Let me tell you a couple of things. This is a museum, so you are welcome to visit the Blanton Museum. The Blanton Museum is fantastic. It's one of the best in the state. And food and beverage is not allowed here. Also, I wonder, we are very full. Actually, I overbooked. I learned from the airlines, so we are heavily overbooked. So if there is a moment that there are too many people here, there is an overflow room, or actually two, where you can see the video. I also want to thank Mallory Tenor, who is the new assistant director of the Knight Center, for helping us with everything here, and all the Knight Center staff and the volunteers. They are using ISOJ T-shirt, a blue T-shirt. So if you need anything, ask them. They are students, and they want to help you. What else I want to say? Oh, with the badge of the Knight Center, you can visit the Blanton Museum. So if you want to escape a little bit and go there, that's it. Another thing for the locals, MLK, this street here, will be closed tomorrow for a race until 9 a.m. So the Brazos garage will be not accessible. So if you want to park, you have to park in the Trinity garage. I will send an email to everybody reminding that, but that's a logistic important thing. Okay, so let's rock and roll. I want to call Jim Moroney. Jim Moroney, like the dean said, is one of our benefactors. And the story of Jim is that I invited him for a couple of years, every year, and he was busy with other things and did not come. And then one day he said, "Oh, okay, I go." And then he comes and he, after he sees the ISOJ, he comes to me and says, "Rosenthal, this is great. Why you never invited me?" I said, "I invited you. You could not come." And then in the end of that year, he calls me in December and say, "Rosenthal, do you still have a chance for underwriting the ISOJ this year, next year?" And I did not know what underwriting meant, but I smelled money there, and I said, yeah, that's a good idea. And he said, "How much?" And I said, "Oh my God, how much?" And I gave a figure. He helped with the lunch, but this is he was the inspiration for the ISOJ become bigger and have all the other donors, and he has been a donor every year. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Rosenthal. I think all of you all know, if you're not feeling good any morning and you just want to get yourself feeling good, just go visit Rosenthal. He's always happy. He's always upbeat, right? Yeah, I love that. Just before we get started, because I just want to say one thing on the heels of what sad news that Rosenthal gave us. I believe that the only antidote to the misguided outcomes of the growing nationalistic movements around this globe, the only antidote is sitting right here in this room. And we have got to continue to tell the truth. All of us, 42 countries around the world, I hope that's what you're really here for, because that's our highest calling. So, I want to talk today a little bit about newspapers in the post-advertising era. Did you know that we're in the post-advertising era? Maybe you don't think we're in the post-advertising era. I am going to try to set the stage for that. Almost set the stage for that. We're going to go. And then I'm going to have a brilliant panel of people that are going to discuss this topic in lots of different ways. It's not just going to be, are we or are we not? But if we are particularly, what are we going to do about it? Because advertising for so long has been the bulwark of our revenues for most newspaper companies around the globe, and we want to talk about that today. But I know we're here in Austin. South by Southwest wasn't too long ago, so I thought we could start with some music to kind of set the stage. So here we go. Is this going to be the first one? Does that go? Let's see. Are you going to hit it? Am I going to hit it? You had it going. I heard. Okay. Music? Music. No music?
Well, it was. You heard that.
You know?
Go back and start again.
It should be on
That's
that
it.
slide.
When you start, it will run.
Just the two of us.
Okay, so you know this song?
If we tried, just the two of us.
Not very Austin-esque, I don't think. But it is Bill Withers. Some of you all know Bill Withers. Lean on Me, what is great song. Right? Why did I pick this? Just the two of us.
Just the two of us.
Because that's who just the two of us is today, right? That's one of the reasons we're in the post-advertising era, because they're taking all the goddamn money. That's where all the digital advertising dollars are going. With each passing year, Google and Facebook are tightening their grip on the online ad market. Digiday, display ads are hardly a growth area in digital media, with most of the digital ad pie going to Google and Facebook. We've read about this, right? We think it's just the two of us. I didn't have a song for just the three of us, but this is the problem right there. They are going to be the greatest advertising machine ever known to mankind. Amazon has a plan to become profitable. It's called advertising. They're doing about $3 billion against Google's $67 billion. They're going to take market share from Google and from Facebook and from all of us. They're on the path. Here's just one more. WPP, Publicis, and Omnicom are looking to spend more than $800 million on Amazon advertising in 2018, and 3 years ago, they weren't really even doing advertising. This is going to be a sucking sound that is going to usher in the post-advertising era for the rest of us local media. All right, next song. Of course, The Boss. That's nice. Darkness on the Edge of Town. Song from the same album. Why Darkness on the Edge of Town? Because of all of these things. This is the problem with digital advertising, right? We got privacy issues. It's now Cambridge Analytics, right? That's not going to help. Fake news, proof of performance, environments that we're not really sure where it's going. You probably read the report a couple of days ago, as much as 82% of programmatic advertising is being done by machines. They don't care where it goes. They're just trying to get that target fulfilled. How do you know where it goes? Are bots the ones actually viewing the ads, or is it real human beings? All of these things are issues that digital advertising has working against it, beyond the fact that there's just 2 and now 3 big companies taking a huge share of that market. Next.
Can't buy me love.
We all know this song. Beatles. Released as a single, later came on the Hard Day's Night album.
Can't buy me love.
And You Can't Buy Me Love.
Yesterday, slide.
See it.
Can't buy me love.
Or maybe not.
Buy you.
Hopefully it stays
Can't
there.
buy me love.
May have to turn the volume down. Here we go. Thank you. So, the point being, it can't buy you love, but it can buy you sustainable profitability, and we need money to do it. After 20 years, what local media company, formerly known as newspaper companies, is paying for its business with revenue from digital advertising? Who in this room is truly paying for their local journalism through digital advertising? Nobody. That's right, nobody. None of us. And we've been working at it for 20 years. 20 years. And now we're finally coming to the conclusion that this isn't the answer. Fewer major publishers of premium digital content now believe display advertising on its own can cover the cost of producing quality content let alone bring a profit. That's the fundamental issue. It's not that advertising's bad and it's good. It's just never going to be sufficient. And Rosenthal knows I was here 5 and 7 and 8 years ago preaching this same message that it's okay, digital advertising, but it's never going to be the solution. And I'm so grateful that I think our industry is now embracing this notion, and that's only going to put more people up against how we solve it. May we be facing a future where we should be setting print advertising at zero because it will not be a profitable exercise to make it. This is Mark Thompson, the CEO of the New York Times. I'm sure you read that. Pretty provocative statement, but I think it's probably right. I know some newspapers that have already created budgets for the future based on no national advertising and then diminishing their local advertising to say, how do we survive? How do we make it financially? This is what we're up against. Throughout the news business, attempts to monetize online traffic by offering free content paid by advertising have proved disappointing. That's to say the least. The very ubiquity of digital advertising has proved disappointing, and that's Dan Kennedy from the Neiman Lab. This, again, is the problem. It's just, it hasn't worked, y'all, and it's not going to work at scale that we need to support our journalism. Advertising will decline by 30% in the next 5 years, and you saw Tabakwala say this big headline, pretty provocative. You know, is it going to go down by 30% in the next 5 years? I don't know. But I'll show you something at the end that will indicate to you where it is going and where the dollars might be going for us locally and what we should be focused on. So I picked this because it's not only the band Boston, it's a good feeling because, at least in the U.S., there's one example of one company that has success, the local metro, not the New York Times, not the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, but the Boston Globe with roughly 100,000 paid digital subscriptions, $18 million in revenue. And remember this, and this is the fundamental point, I think, of why we want to focus on paid digital subscribers, because they have a marginal cost of nearly zero. Adding one digital paid subscriber costs nothing, and adding 100,000 costs virtually nothing. All your infrastructure is there. Your journalism's already being produced. Some marketing, some data analytics, some data scientists, you're going to need that. But relative, this is high margin revenue, much higher than what you get out of programmatic advertising that has a cost of goods sold of 40% and more. So this is why I think the industry is moving all of their top of their strategies over to this and ushering in again that end of the advertising era and into the reader revenue era. You all know great booing. This is all booing changes. And I think it's pretty obvious why we have changes. With the increasing inability of digital advertising dollars and so much of a publication's success placed in the hands of giants like Google and Facebook, publications have to explore new avenues. That's what we have to do. Today, no CMO wants to talk about banners. What they want to talk about is services, experiential, strategy, creative. In the new world order, media is the downstream thing that may or may not be a part of the package. Publishers will enter 2018 more focused than ever on diversifying their sources of revenue streams away from display advertising. I want to leave you with two things today. Number one, let's quit calling our customers advertisers. Advertising is a subset of a much larger marketing budget. And you have the relationships and the opportunities to earn other parts of that marketing budget. Call them marketing customers. Talk to them about marketing. Don't just talk to them about advertisers. And when we call them advertisers, we're limiting our thinking and we're limiting our opportunity to get a larger share of their marketing budget, which we can earn. Here is the chart I'm going to end on. This is from Burrell. The bottom line is local advertising. The top line is local promotions and marketing, or what we call local marketing services. You can see that basically advertising as a source of local revenue, at least in the United States, is flatlining. And where's all the growth? It's coming from marketing services. And so I hope you'll hear today from our panelists, happy to talk about it myself, about what the Dallas Morning News has been doing with marketing services. It now represents 40% of our advertising and marketing services pie. We continue to diminish the part that is advertising. And I think this is where I hope a lot of you all are today, or if not, where you're headed. Well, now we're going to start turning it over to the panel and let them talk about, are we in a post-advertising era? We're going to go one at a time, and the first person up is going to be Sarah Glines. She is the president and publisher of the Raleigh News and Observer, and she's also McClatchy's publisher of the Carolinas. So, Sarah, stage is yours, and here's the clicker.
All right, thank you, Jim. Thank you, Lisa. If I click, it'll just go. There we go. Thank you. I apologize. I have a little bit of a cold, and my voice is coming and going, so we'll see how this goes. So in the face of all this disruption you've heard about from Jim, and I liked how Jim said that we're diminishing our advertising. I don't remember exactly how he said it, but I thought diminishing our print advertising and even our digital advertising numbers is sort of the easiest work we've ever done, because it just seems to keep happening. So in this era, in Raleigh, we're thinking about how can we pay for our newsrooms completely with online subscriptions. What if we can figure out how to fund journalism through the digital audience it serves? There we go. I got it. What if we can figure out how to fund that journalism just through digital subscriptions? To do that, we have to be purposeful in connecting our audience with our journalists. Journalists have to have a seat at the table. And if they do, what does that mean for journalists and how we value them? And what does it mean for journalism? We're thinking about that a lot. Our new executive editor and Carolina's regional editor, Robin Tomlin, thank you, Jim Maroney, she's most recently of the Dallas Morning News, has set a goal for our newsrooms to pay for themselves completely with online subscriptions within 3 years. It has journalists thinking about what their job really is and about how they will be valued and what this means for journalistic values. Long gone are the days where journalists really worked in the absence of readers. That is, they determined what was important to be covered based on their own internal guideposts. Those were the days when journalists stayed confined to the world of content. That was their seat at the table. It was a small one. They were convinced that the readers were there, whether they really were or not. They owned that piece, but again, it was a small piece. Then came data, page views, time on site, unique visitors. It was data, and it did inform content decisions to a certain extent, but it was so broad that it really couldn't help us determine what our next story should be or where we should be focusing our resources and attention. Now add deep analytics, which is more than just raw data. It's really understanding from that data what are our readers really connecting with and what are they doing. When you start looking at data analytics and you start talking about how a story connects with the audience, and you start asking journalists to think about that and focus their attentions based on that information, now it's marketing. And they're really becoming a sort of marketer. And when you start doing that, some journalists start thinking you're pushing them far too far into the marketing world. If you're going to fund the newsroom on digital subscriptions, you do need to understand what causes a reader to pay. And so we started looking at a reader funnel. What moves a reader from awareness to experience to preference and paying? It's similar to our advertising marketing funnel that we talk about when we try to sell ad campaigns. When we start out talking to advertisers, we ask them where they think their audience is, and then we create campaigns to help move that audience down through the funnel until they make a buying actions. reader funnels are pretty much the same thing. Readers start in that funnel with awareness. They may see a story on Facebook, they may see something on Twitter or get a link from a friend, and so they use our content occasionally. Then maybe they find that we cover something they really care about, and so they start following us on Twitter, or they sign up for a newsletter. Now we're part of their media experience, and they're moving down through that funnel. So how do we take a reader from the experience level to the preferred level, where we are their go-to source? And then once we've got them there, how do we move them to take that buying action? And once they've subscribed, how do we further move them to start referring us to their friends? And then we can start moving those friends back through that reader funnel. In Raleigh, we've started that process. We have a long way to go because we're just starting to gather the data. It's the very beginning phase. We'll gather all the information, we'll funnel it through our data scientists. But while we're doing that and trying to understand better what stories we need to be focused on to move people through that funnel, we're going to start working with our journalists to change their behavior, to make sure they are truly audience-focused. It's a difficult thing for journalists right now because integrity, as we've talked about, is such a big issue. And we don't want to be seen as writing clickbait or producing fake news that is only there to push people through this funnel. But I think it's important that we start turning that conversation, and it can be done in a way that respects all that integrity. So we've developed a couple of key tools for our journalists. The first is an audience checklist. And this is devised to make sure that when you write that story, there is actually some audience there to connect with. And it has to be a significant audience, and it has to be an audience that you as the reporter are keenly aware of. So at the beginning of the process, a reporter and an editor sit down together, and they'll have this conversation. And it asks, who cares about this story, or who should care about this story? And if you want to cover, say, an education story, the answer can't be everybody who cares about education, because that's not truly an audience. So when you are creating the idea for your story, you're thinking about, is this going to connect with middle school students or the parents of middle schoolers who are in STEM programs? And as you start defining that audience, you have to figure out, is this an audience that's big enough for me to spend time on the story? And if it isn't, so if you get through who cares and you don't quite make it, and then you think, can I expand that audience? Can I expand the story and get a larger audience? Is that one way that I can pursue this? So if you move through the checklist and you can't get to the point where you can say, yes, that I have identified my audience, the answer really should be, go find another story. But you do have one last chance to be able to write the story you want to. If the story is not going to connect with a large audience, but it is going to be a story of significant impact, it might save a life, it might change a law, it might free an innocent person from prison, then we should write that story even if it's only focused on 3 people. And so yes, that would be a move on to the next checklist. And the next checklist for us is mission. If you get through audience, now you have to make sure that you can answer yes to one of these questions. Will a story break news that holds leaders or institutions accountable? Will the story break news that makes a concrete difference in the community or to people in it? Will the story tell readers something that will directly affect their lives and the lives of their families and friends? Will the story use extraordinary storytelling to bring a societal issue really to life? Or will this story attract an extraordinary amount of readers? And if you think about this mission checklist, you could not write a sports story until you got down to number 5. And so that's why it's important to appreciate that everything doesn't have to be a solid part of that hardcore journalistic effort. There are things that we write that are really just to help people engage, have fun, connect with other people in their community. And so that's why there's number 5 on the checklist. Also, on our big stories, where we think they're highly important and there's an important community that we need to reach, our reporters will have an engagement list that includes the names and contact information of all the affinity groups and people or leaders or influencers who might be interested in that story. So after the story is written, the reporter and the editors will send out a link from their story to those groups. Now that's truly marketing. That's sending out communication to drive interaction with the reader. And hopefully, if they're an advocacy group, they will spread it within their community. It's marketing, but it's marketing well within our journalistic endeavors. It's so that a journalist has impact with their story. So we think of it as really good marketing. So as we learn more and more about how data is informing us about what users are doing, how they're interacting, we will probably change some of the questions on both of these checklists. And as we figure out those answers, journalists will certainly be thinking about how this defines their value. If I, as a journalist, figure out how to answer all those questions and generate significant audience, and if I figure out what stories will drive readers through that funnel to take that buying action, if my stories are particularly good at that, don't I have more value to the organization? And I, as a publisher, think, yes, you do. And so what does that mean for compensation? What does that mean for how we start paying our journalists? Is it okay to compensate them when they grow our audience significantly? Or does that push them away from their journalistic mission and move them too far into the marketing world? We don't know, but we're certainly starting to have those conversations. I think that's important for us to be thinking about as we're learning what we learn, because journalists will quickly figure it out and start asking us those questions. And also, what does it mean for those journalists who are doing great work, but the work they're doing is really not the kind of work that moves a reader through the funnel? Does that mean that their work has less value? Should they be compensated less? I don't know that answer either. But those are all things we're starting to think about. Then there's one other thing we think about quite a bit, and that is in news deserts, the UNC School of Media said that because of all this disruption and the financial issues in the news industry, there are these places all around the country, small communities that no longer have newspapers because it couldn't be supported through advertising. So if we can start to figure out how to fund journalism on the backs of audience very directly, can we start eliminating news deserts and bring more local journalism back into our communities? And wouldn't that be grand? And isn't that really what it's all about? Thank you.
And next up is the Executive Director and the CEO of the Lindfest Institute for Journalism that I'm sure you have read about. They're doing some incredibly innovative and experimenting in important ways through a nonprofit organization. And here to talk about that and other things is the Executive Director, Jim Friedlich.
I actually have no slides and no music this morning, so that's kind of analog. Boring. Wow.
Tough crowd. It's a tough crowd.
Thank you. I woke up this morning and read my Twitter, as I always do, and it occurred to me that the best thing that we could do to support digital journalism and sell more subscriptions here in America would be to re-elect Donald Trump to a second, third, and a fourth term as president. I'm Jim Friedlich, and I run the Lindfest Institute, as Jim Maroney said. We are the parent company of the Philadelphia Inquirer. We're a not-for-profit. Our mission is to help support new models for sustainable journalism. We're the largest owner of a public benefit corporation operating as a newspaper in America. And the goal is to use the Philadelphia Inquirer as a test lab for the transformation of journalism in America. And we think that user revenues and digital subscriptions and community support are absolutely integral to that, including philanthropic support. I'm here with a very positive set of messages and a handful of examples. about the future of journalism, and particularly the role of the user and the reader in that. I wanted to talk briefly about 3 ways in which media consumers, and I mean media consumers writ large, not only consumers of news, are increasing their spending and the quality of their time and commitment to great content, which bodes well for great journalism. I'll start as Jim Moroney did with kind of a macro view, but I think a more positive one, or the other side of the coin. Jim talked about the decline of advertising, or the aggregation of advertising firepower within a handful of major companies. That's absolutely true. I think we are in a post-advertising era, at least for the news business. But the user-funded media is actually booming, and that's something that we can take advantage of. The total global spend on media and entertainment, according to Bain last year, was $750 billion. This is, to be clear, TV, digital, movies, games, mobile, radio, print, digital subscriptions, every ticket to Hamilton, absolutely everything. Hamilton was probably about half of that. But, the consumer share of that, $750 billion, and that itself is growing. The consumer share was 40% in 2000. It was 50% in 2010, and it was 65% last year. That's a shift of hundreds of billions of dollars to consumers paying for content that they love. The biggest piece of this, to be sure, is video. It's Netflix, it's Hulu, on-demand TV, cable subs, sports tickets. The trend also includes Pandora, Spotify, iTunes, but it also includes subscriptions to great journalism. The fastest growers were, am I touching this thing here? Sorry. They're not so boring, huh? I'll show you I'm going to show you David Perpich's slides before I'm through. The same trend, the same wind in the sails is affecting the New York Times, David, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, which has been selling digital subscriptions for many, many years. So it's important, and I think very, very encouraging, to recognize that asking readers to pay for stuff that they love and find important is part of a much, much bigger trend, and that trend is quite a positive one. It's very, very good news for good news, which is the business that we're in. The second trend I wanted to cite briefly is that of communities, and communities are groups of engaged users supporting their most cherished journalism in a direct and positive way with user payments large and small. I see John Thornton sitting in the second row here. We're here in the hometown of the great Texas Tribune, and the Texas Tribune gets at least half of its income from users, either through events like the festival or from direct membership and payments, and from philanthropy and from foundations. This is a form of user payment and something that we should take greater and greater advantage of. I say that as the head of a nonprofit that supports a great American newspaper. But 2 quick examples, and both of these are from yesterday. There's a site called Berkeley Site, which is the Berkeley, California community website. It announced something yesterday called a direct public offering. They raised $1 million from 355 community members. That's about $3,000 apiece. And the direct public offering was modeled on, of all things, the sale of stock by the Green Bay Packers. For those of you who are not U.S. natives, the Green Bay Packers is the only NFL team owned by its community. And they've sold stock over the years to the people of Green Bay. Why not do that for news? It seems to have worked quite effectively. The second, I think many of you would have seen a quite impassioned editorial from the Denver Post over the weekend. Who read this? So that's about half of you. The Denver Post is owned by a New York-based hedge fund called Alden Capital. It has cut its newsroom from 250 people to 100 as of a couple of months ago. They were just ordered to cut another 35 people. So the largest newspaper in the state of Colorado will have 65 people in its newsroom before long. And the newsroom, the editorial page, actually rose up and rebelled and wrote an opinion piece saying, as the vultures circle, who will save the Denver Post? They cried out to the community and asked for support. We heard about this through Twitter and other means, but they've reached out to us, and investors have reached out to us, looking at our model and our structure for the city of Philadelphia. Yesterday, they reported that they had soft-circled $10 million of local support to try to buy the newspaper. Whether Alden chooses to sell, whether the community is a high bidder versus a Gatehouse or a Gannett or others who might have deeper pockets, I don't know. But this is a form of getting the community who believe in your mission, believe in your content, to pay. And I think that's another piece of good news for journalism, and I think we'll see more of it. The third trend is a proliferation of really creative new payment models that give both software enablement and new ways for users to engage in journalism. I'm going to mention three, one called the News Revenue Hub, one called Scroll, and one called Pactio. Just briefly, the News Revenue Hub grew out of the Voice of San Diego, which appealed to its users to pay whatever they thought they should pay and whatever they thought was fair to become members of the Voice of San Diego. The content is free. You don't need to pay for it. It's like NPR. It's optional. They also did not put a price on it. They said, whatever you think this is worth to you. They've raised over $1 million a year using these methodologies. And they've taken that activity on the road and a kind of light tech stack called the News Revenue Hub, and they've been helpful to dozens of publications around the country. The second, Scroll, was started by Tony Hale, who you might know as the founder of Chartbeat, and a colleague who came out of Spotify, of all places. And they've described this as Netflix for news, or TSA pre-check for news. The idea is a subscriber pays $5 for an all-you-can-eat pass to a collection of member publications. There's a small investment from the New York Times. There's investment from Axel Springer. There's a serious group of high-value investors involved. And the notion is, for the $5 a month, you get an advertising light or advertising free experience, all you can eat. Those dollars are allocated to the news properties based upon the usage, which is how Netflix works. The third, Pactio, is a raw startup by Adriano Ferrano, who's an Italian entrepreneur based in Silicon Valley. And this is kind of Patreon for journalists. Individual journalists are on the platform and can charge, can get legal services, can engage with their users directly. And this grew out of a collection of San Jose Mercury News journalists who said, I've just been laid off, but my community still cares about me. I still want to cover Sunnyvale. I still want to cover San Jose. Each of these three is a creative idea and a software-enabled idea, and they all borrow from other parts of the payment ecosystem. I want to close quickly with a thought about some work we're doing at the Lenfest Institute together with partners at the Knight Foundation, with API, with Democracy Fund, and a collection of for-profit newspapers like the Dallas Morning News to help publishers build digital subscriptions. Our experience in this area suggests that there really are two dimensions that matter, and you need both. One is mission and a strong sense that democracy dies in darkness, as the Washington Post says, that your community should care about the content that you produce, and you should create content that they should care about. The second is kind of the hard work, but not rocket science, of best practices in metering your readers, in asking them to pay, in putting prices in front of them that are palatable, et cetera. There are a collection of best practices that we've calibrated, that we've quantified, and we're trying to share in any way that we can, and we'd love to do so with you. There's a site called the Better News Hub, which is API's site that collects a lot of this work. They've done terrific work on subscriptions. There is an ongoing collection of workshops that we are helping lead, and that's led by Boston's own Tim Griggs on behalf of the Lenfest Institute, paid for by, of all people, the Facebook Journalism Project. This brings together 14 major metros. We started 2 weeks ago to compare best practices. So we can look at why Boston's emails work better than Philadelphia's. We can look at why the Dallas Morning News has done such a great job of engaging through Facebook and creating Facebook groups and converting them to subscribers. It's absolutely hands-on, how-to, and it's completely transparent in the public interest. All of this is being blogged about on our site and on the Facebook site in a great deal of detail. So with all of that, plus a few more years of Donald Trump and Stormy Daniels, not boring, we'll sell millions and millions of digital subscriptions. I wanted to close with a personal thanks to Jim Moroney, who, when I was building a business called Empirical Media, whose passion and mission was to help transform news media companies to a sustainable future through a lot of these kinds of methods, was my biggest supporter, our biggest client, and that business was acquired by Jerry Lenfest, who started the Lenfest Institute and became my work and my passion today. So thank you, Jim Moroney, and thank you all.
Our next speaker is David Perpich. He is the general manager, president general manager of Wirecutter. I think most of you all know that Wirecutter is owned by the New York Times, and David engineered this purchase by the New York Times, and today he is on their executive committee. So David, come on up here.
Great. Thanks, John. All right. So, what I thought I'd do today is talk a little bit about what the New York Times is doing in this kind of post-advertising era, and try to also kind of relate it to people in the crowd. I know the New York Times stands in a unique position, but I do think there are things we're doing that can apply to more people beyond the Times. And for me, I think just to say what I think of as post-advertising, you know, the business model for journalism used to be one where we created journalism, we aggregated an audience, and then advertisers paid for access to that audience to buy ads. And so, you know, basically the monetization was indirect. The journalism wasn't actually driving the revenue, the audience was. And I think, you know, to Jim's point earlier about Google and Facebook, they've essentially, you know, aggregated the entire US audience, world audiences in places, and can offer targeting at scale. And I think that's, to me, what post-advertising means, which is that that fundamental business model that was in place before doesn't exist the way it did before. And so the question is, what do you do about it? So for me, these are kind of the three takeaways that I would hit with this group, which is that you start with the end user first. It sounds simple enough, but you know, if you're thinking about the reader, what is journalism that's worth paying for? You know, it's not, I like Jim's comment about, it's not advertisers, it's marketers. What do they really value? Second, that the journalism and the business model are connected. You can't, you know, separate them. You know, if you're going to go and do an activity and engage with readers, you need to think about how that's going to translate to revenue. And same thing with marketers. And then last, that reader trust is the foundation for long-term success. It sounds obvious, but it's always worth saying in this new world as we go into this. The best decisions put the reader first, and those decisions pay off in the long term. So, with the Times. In 2015, we released a document called Our Path Forward. I don't know how many of you have read it, but it basically said we're a subscription business first. And even kind of, I think, you know, in a sharper sort of way, there was a statement that said, we're in the business of creating journalism worth paying for. It actually literally connected the journalism and the business model into one line. And these things, you know, on the right, these headlines are just examples of the type of journalism that, you know, are worth paying for. And I think, you know, it's easy to say, okay, we're going to start charging, and, you know, of course people will start paying because we have great journalism, but it is really worth thinking, you know, what are the things that matter to people? As Sarah was talking about, you know, what is it that the community values? It's original reporting, it's the right investigative work, it's trusted voices. for us, continually reimagining storytelling and visual journalism. These are all the kinds of things that we believe are worth paying for, and where the Times is increasingly putting our focus in terms of building our audience. And some of you may have heard that this has translated to us in the past year $1 billion in consumer revenue across print and digital. And I'll also just say for this group, I think that subscription revenue and reader revenue is the foundation for the news business moving forward, but I also don't think it's the only revenue stream. Once again, that comment of it's not advertisers, it's marketers. Starting with a marketer, actually, Jim included a quote from a colleague, Seb Tomich, who heads the advertising sales group at the Times. But actually starting with a marketer and saying, what is it that they value? Before, we didn't really need to ask that. We just said, we have these ads. Who wants to buy them? They're next to our media. Now we've got to say, hey, what is it that you're trying to achieve? And then work backwards. For us at the Times, that's led to thinking about different kind of formats. Up here on the left-hand side, we developed a flex frame unit, but that wasn't enough. We also wanted to go and say, hey, how do we help marketers create ads just as high quality as our journalism? So we actually went and created T-Brand Studios. But beyond that, we're also thinking about different ways that we can create great journalistic experiences for our readers, but also help our marketers. So one thing that we did here was the Daily 360, where we partnered with Samsung. They provided the technology, and we actually did 360 videos every day for a year going around the world. And so we're continually thinking about what are the different things that we can be doing that are good for our readers and good for our marketers. So one other thing to think about is that, oftentimes I think we equate journalism with news, but actually journalism can be more than just news. Journalism to me is great reporting. And in 2013, I started the new product division at the Times. At the time, we were a subscription business, and we thought, hey, let's create a series of niche news products. And we created NYT Now, NYT Opinion, Cooking, Crosswords. Some of you hopefully know those products or have used them. And when we were doing cooking, we had this really interesting moment because we said, okay, well, cooking, we'll just go and we'll take our great food coverage and recipes and we'll go put it into a publication online. But actually, we started with the reader because we knew if we were going to actually charge for this, people had to be willing to pay for it. We couldn't just put it online and then slap a price onto it. And when we started with the reader, we actually worked backwards. We said, you know what? They actually don't want just another food publication. They want help with figuring out what to cook and managing the recipes and knowing what other readers are having to say about those recipes. And that led us to create Cooking, which you see up there is What to Cook and Crosswords. Together, Cooking and Crosswords today have about, as of last publicly reported numbers, 415,000 subscribers. But even more importantly, they're part of a bundle, this larger bundle that is the New York Times. And I think one of the realizations that we had while we did this too is that newspapers, as I said, we're actually about more than about news. I think when we made this transition from print to digital, we said, okay, we're a newspaper company, we'll drop the paper, and now we're a news company. But the reality is that newspapers always played a much bigger role in our readers' lives. They were kind of a central place of gathering information for communities and readers. And some of those things aren't coming back, like classifieds. But we realized that there are a bunch of different needs that the New York Times could fulfill for our readers. What to cook, what to play, which was Crosswords. We launched a watching product that exists and has been successful. How to be healthy is our wellness vertical. It's not really a standalone product, but we've done a lot of innovation. And one of those things was what to buy. And we thought, okay, why don't we go and find these other reader needs that we can actually support our audience in? And with what to buy, we actually said, okay, well, should we build this or should we buy it? And as it turned out, Wirecutter existed. And it was kind of talking within the company in the newsroom, we said, hey, this is the thing that actually we'd build if we had the time to do it. Let's have this conversation about whether it makes sense to acquire. So we acquired Wirecutter. And for those of you who have not used it, actually just quick show of hands, who here has ever used Wirecutter before? Okay. Many more people should be using it, but I'm not here to pitch Wirecutter. Basically what it is, it's a product recommendation site. So you say, I want to figure out what cordless stick vacuum to buy. You actually go, we say, we've done a ton of research, we've looked at all these models, we think this is the best pick for most people. If you're on a budget, here's a budget pick. If you really, really care about this specific thing you're looking to own for years and years and years, this is the upgrade pick. And I think, for us, what we did is we started with the reader. We knew that this was a real reader need out there. People wanted actionable advice to make decisions. And for Wirecutter and for the Times, we felt like it was at a quality worth paying for. It's deeply investigative, reported pieces. Oftentimes takes 12 weeks to actually get to the place where we make a recommendation. We think about real-world testing, not in the lab testing. We think about actually what the reader needs are and not championing and heroing products. And in this case, though, from a monetization model standpoint, we didn't just assume we're going to slap ads on or we're going to slap a subscription on. We had to be really thoughtful and said, this is a transactional model. We're helping people make decisions. And this isn't about an advertising solution, but there is a marketing solution here, affiliate revenue, performance revenue, where we can bring those two things together. And so that's kind of where we've landed with Wirecutter. And across all of these things, they're seeded throughout the New York Times as a way to discover these new products and vice versa. And so we see this as an ecosystem and a portfolio. So just to recap, understand what your readers and marketers truly care about. You've got to build experiences that are actually truly differentiated in the digital world. Your competition is just one click away. And if it's just as good and free or better, they're not going to be coming to you. And then think about what that right connection is with the monetization strategy. So with that, turn it over to Jim.
Okay, and our last speaker before we go to the panel is the Executive Director and the CEO of the International News Media Association. I think probably most of you know Earl Wilkinson. I can assure you that he is the foremost authority on journalism around the world, and he probably has visited every one of the 42 countries represented in this room. Earl?
Thank you. Okay, 10 months ago, I visited the Globe and Mail in Canada, Canada's national newspaper, and I was in a town hall meeting, and I visited. I got particularly sharp questions from one individual. Went up to him after the speech. I said, "What do you do?" He said, "I'm the director of the innovation lab here at the Globe and Mail." I said, "Can you show me the lab?" And there were about 16, 17 smart young people all in a room. And I said, so the innovation lab at the Globe and Mail solves problems for management. Is that correct? He said, yes. What's the number one problem that the Globe and Mail, Canada's national newspaper, has? And he says, I guess over time we don't know what the value of our content is. I said, so what are you doing about it? So he took me over to a young lady, a data analytics person, and she's basically sharing with me their content scoring system. And she starts to explain to me how they score content based on a propensity to be shared on social media, propensity to trigger a digital subscription, propensity to add brand equity. And I sort of stopped her and I said, okay, it's above my head. I'll tell you what, I'm going to call BS on this initiative. That's what I thought. And I said, I want you to take me out to your newsroom right now, and I'm going to point to someone about my age, and I want to see how this is really being applied, because I'm going to expose them as frauds, right? So we walked out to the newsroom, and I pointed to a lady about my age, and I said, tell me about this system. And she proceeded to school me on the deep knowledge that the Globe and Mail newsroom had about the economics of content. The economics of content are simply not what we thought they were, especially as we take it from print into digital. And as we start getting into the reader revenue era, hopefully to replace that print advertising hole, we find, in fact, as I continue to travel the world visiting our members, I found that in Australia, in New Zealand, in Argentina, in Chile, I'm regurgitating a trip I took shortly thereafter, throughout Europe, North America. All of these companies are working on these economics of content, and they think that it's a very unique experience for them, and they're trying to, invent what is true to their values, true to their brand. And as I start connecting the dots, I start to realize, hang on, we need to start surfacing this. We need to create common metrics, common benchmarks, common language. And what we're trying to do as an association, as the International News Media Association, is do just that. Now, if you go back about 20 years, when the first paywall started to come about, you had some true pioneers like the Wall Street Journal really wanted to make money on this. You had others like the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette. They put up a $1,000 paywall to protect their print product. And that was a legitimate business condition. Freemium models, where editors basically select which content gets locked, rose in importance. Financial Times comes along, invents the metered model. New York Times comes along and makes it better. And we are a follow-the-leader industry, so we all looked at it and said, meters. That's the answer. And so North America, Latin America, Europe, South Pacific, all came behind a metered model. The problem is the meter didn't work for most metropolitan and local newspapers, or at least didn't operate or succeed on the level of the New York Times and others. And so now we've seen since 2015 and 2016 the pendulum go back to more of a data-infused editor select freemium model that's really become popular in the South Pacific, sweeping Europe, etc. In Scandinavia, they've created a sort of freemium meter hybrid model. And I think the Americas are starting to go in that direction as well. And so now all of a sudden we're obsessed with this question, what triggers a digital subscription? Every company I've been to, roughly this truism exists. About 10% of your content is driving 90% of your traffic. Oh, I don't know. Do we need McKinsey or Bain to come in to tell you? How do you prioritize more than 10%? And how do you deprioritize, or maybe you park into other platforms like print, the 90%? But we're having an intelligent conversation as an industry on the value and the economics of content, and it's sorely been missing. So we've begun to aggregate, oh my goodness, notice all the zeros up there. Nobody wants to talk about real numbers here. But this is my best effort looking at global brands, national brands, qualities, populars, communities. What I find broadly is that most of us are we're identifying where the Netflix line is and the Spotify line is, and we're pivoting up or down. I'm finding in Germanic Europe more premium publishers. They're charging as much as 41 euros, 53 euros for a digital subscription because they're still trying to protect their print subscription price. I think, in fact, I heard this in the panel this morning. This is marketing 101. Marketing is a dirty word. We don't want to talk about that. But I think it's very, very interesting. David, you talked, you hinted at a stack a little bit. I think that there are a number of things. This is where we all started, folks. We just took the dumb print newspaper and stuck it online and stuck a wall around it and stuck a bad sign-up experience around it, and we stepped back and said, okay, does it work? Well, no, it didn't work. It was terrible. But I make the argument that we need to build this stack over time. And we need to get better at the sign-up process, and we have. We have to fine-tune the meter, fine-tune the freemium models. Newsrooms have to get smarter about what gets locked and what doesn't get locked. ABP in Calcutta, India, has targeted the Bengali diaspora around the world and has generated money on that. If you talk to News Corp, if you talk to The Guardian, they believe that digital subscriptions are simply a subset of a broader membership model. We'll see if that works. I'm very interested, Jim, in what you were talking about in some of the donation models. That's also becoming a trend in Spain and Finland as well. I visited Sweden and Norway this last year, and I just want to, on a bulleted basis in my limited time, share with you some of the things that I discovered, because I do believe that there are two epicenters for digital subscriptions on the planet today, and it's Scandinavia, it's the South Pacific. So I'm going to share with you some learnings from there. First of all, what I saw was, you've got to break the experiences down. The New York Times may be the greatest newspaper in the world. 99.9% of our members are not the New York Times. Okay, so their reality on a local level is different than quality nationals and is different than popular newspapers, tabloids. What we are finding is that popular newspapers tend to be very low priced and are reach vehicles for companies, whereas their quality newspapers are more, I wouldn't call them premium priced, but they're higher priced and more about the deep reader relationship. And community groups, I've been very surprised. Media is the case study in Norway. You'll see here, I think, in a minute. But look, that's relatively premium priced. And they've got some real success. I think combined, Scandinavia stands out because of the totality of the culture shift. I'm hearing a lot of stories in Latin America where you've got newsrooms who are basically saying, we have nothing to do with that. That's someone else's responsibility. And those companies are underperforming versus Scandinavia, where the editors are a lot of times in charge. And they're pushing down these KPIs and this economics of content. And they're having daily conversations about the art and science of triggering subscriptions. What we're finding, though, is as you look across a broader landscape, different genres of publications are triggering subscriptions. Dagens Nyheter is a national newspaper. Nothing up on that screen should surprise you. But on the community side, it's interesting. They get as much success with live stream B-League Norwegian football with a stationary camera up in the stadium in terms of triggering subscriptions. By the way, they upgraded that and they put another camera in the goal. So, but I just think we're getting smarter and smarter about what's triggering it. And I think with Dagens Nyheter in Sweden, what stands out is their editor-in-chief is actually in charge. Only newspaper in the world that I know that this is true. Dagens Nyheter, what else is true about them? They have reduced subscriber churn by getting into the micro-segmentation business. This is something we're going to be following as an association. We go to Aftenposten in Norway. I find as they get smarter and smarter about churn and propensity, they're learning, for example, if you only consume Aftenposten on a tablet, you have a higher propensity to churn than if you consume it across platforms. If you only subscribe and consume content in sports, you have a higher propensity to churn. So they're trying to use those basic findings, get smarter, and get people to change their behaviors. They're finding that news junkies, it's all about personalization. Infrequent visitors, it's always about content synthesis. What I find fascinating about this panel so far today, I say marketing 101, it could be journalism 101. What does any of this have to do with digital subscriptions? I get questions all the time. Oh, are you talking about, popular stories? What happens to real journalism? I think that you've got some content that is designed to be shared on social media, some designed to generate PR, some designed to trigger subscriptions, and some content is designed to build brand equity. It's the foundation for all future success. Now, I've gone through this like a machine gun, and I'm trying to keep to the time limits. Let me sort of wrap this up. I think that digital subscriptions is more about marketing 101 or journalism 101. I think that digital subscriptions are at minimum the foundation of a broader stack, at maximum a bigger membership play. I think what I'm struggling with and what my members are struggling with is what is success? The numbers I put on the screen, I don't think most people would understand. Is that good? We don't know yet. I think that there are two games being played, volume versus premium, and, are you going to price based on the market price or to protect print subscriptions? I think culture is a central part of this story, as is engagement. And I didn't really include it, but one of the smartest things I saw was with this Media in Norway, when they said to us, they said, the key to our success in generating reader revenue is cutting out the noise of content and journalism, which I just sort of stepped back and I was blown away that someone would tell me that. But when you look at the totality of the content that you produce, what content is standing in the way of building that reader revenue business? And finally, what a shocker, and I guess this will set up the panel, please get obsessed with the economics of content. It is the new lingua franca. Thank you very much.
John Thornton. John founded the Texas Tribune.
Oh.
If you need a doctor in town, this guy is here.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I'd love to talk to you anyways.
Panel, good.
His ears were kind of blown out on the plane. I don't know anybody else who lives here.
I guess
I'll
I'll
talk
do
to
a
you.
presentation.
Do you want us
Thanks,
to do
Jen.
it that way?
All right. We're going to do some questions with the panel, and then we'll open it up to questions from the audience. I think we've got a little under 30 minutes. So let me start with this. And I think Sarah sort of touched on it a little bit. She talked about what about the places where there could be journalism sort of deserts because they're not going to be able to do what it takes to perhaps drive digital subscriptions. I think it comes back to data. We heard about data scientists, data analytics, and so forth. Talk a little bit about, each of you all, what is the importance of data analytics? Does it get into AI, machine learning? What needs to happen for any large or small news media company that's local to drive these digital subscriptions? How are they using data? Sarah, or anybody who wants to start?
Well, I think the challenge is large organizations today. We can invest in data, and we can invest in the technology needed to drive it, and we can hire the data scientists that we need to analyze it. I think when we talk about news deserts, I think the barrier to entry there is going to be, can they get the technology and the expertise to really start to understand it? That's where I think projects like, INMA and LendFest are so important to that effort, because the more they can share that information out and sort of lower that barrier to entry, so that maybe they can't be the New York Times, but they can at least figure out what the best practices are to get a little start. So things that, give me hope in that are like the Billy Penn's and the Incline Spirited Media's efforts, where they really could start to do some journalistic efforts. Now they're doing it in big metros, but can you take a model like that and move it into a small community and just be able to fund a couple of reporters who can then sort of start to shut down those news deserts? I think that's important.
David, what can companies with much less resources in the New York Times, what can we do? What should we be doing?
I think we oftentimes talk about being data informed, and I think just being able to use the data as a way to uncover insights about your readers. It sounds pretty simple, but really trying to get a handle on what resonates with them and what's important. And then I would just say more broadly, I think that there's something really interesting that in some ways the print product was more personalized than the digital experience. Most people, they pull out their phone, they're on the home screen, or you go to a desktop, you're on the home page. And I think there's just a lot of opportunity to unlock the journalism and the value that's oftentimes buried, that if you're coming back once a day, you might miss. The New York Times publishes 250, 300 stories a day. Most people only see a fraction of that. So how do you get the right stories to the right people?
Most of the news executives and media executives that I've talked to tell me that they're awash in data, and the question is how to derive intelligence from the data. There are a couple of data points that kind of need most focus. One is, what does a regular reader look like? The way to get subscribers to subscribe, or readers to turn into paying subscribers with a meter or a freemium model, is to get them to come back to your site 5, 10, 15 times in a month. That's where the meter triggers. So we've spent a fair amount of time with the Philadelphia Inquirer, with our other Night LendFest table stakes newspapers, looking at what does a regular user look like. And if you can isolate that type of person and their habits from a data perspective, you know at least whom you're targeting. That represents a shift from getting as many page views and eyeballs as possible to as many engaged users. And that really has been the secret of the New York Times. Not so secret. You have great engagement.
Yeah.
The second data point is under the category of, if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. I think we should be thinking about how many digital subscribers or how much user support a given news organization like the Dallas Morning News or the New York Times need to transition fully to digital. So if a metropolitan newspaper has a $20 million newsroom, they need about 100,000 paid digital subscribers at about $200 a piece to purely support that effort. This was sort of the core math that you were talking about.
Right.
And it's rare that you talk to a news organization that says, we have 20,000 subscribers digitally, but the goal is 100,000 or 200,000 by such and such a date. So having a clear path and a clear goal defined by data is, I think, the second half of that.
Earl, I want to switch for a second. You talked about the Scandinavian newspaper that has an editor in charge of their paid digital subscription growth. Talk a little bit about that culture and what that felt like, and then I'd like to come back to the panelists and say to this question I think Sarah and others brought up. Are journalists going to be valued based on the number of digital subscribers that their content, from the Dallas Morning News, Mark Francis Cuddy, where are you, Mark? Mark, wherever Mark is, he knows right now how many digital subscribers have converted off every single individual reporter's reporting. Yet we're not exactly publishing that. So what does this mean to journalists?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question because hearing some of the answers, I wanted to touch on the cultural part. I think the cultural piece of this, why do you put the editor in charge of digital subscriptions? It's to send a signal. It's clearly to get the newsroom behind these changes because, I know throughout our membership network, major newspapers around the world, you've got newsrooms that want nothing to do with this data revolution, nothing to do with digital. That's someone else, that's another department's job. And what we're seeing in Scandinavia generally is they've succeeded, especially in the last 3 to 5 years, in getting their newsrooms on board. Dagens Nyheter takes it to the next level by actually putting their editor personally in charge. And, you want to motivate a newsroom. When the person in charge is personally in charge of it, he would walk us out to the newsroom and boom, here are the KPIs that are behind his goals. And you could talk to his staff, and it was clearly being pushed down, just like it was pushed down at the Globe and Mail, by the way. You're seeing just smarter, you talk about Mark, what we're seeing more and more are enablers, people, translators, people who can see the data and then communicate it to rank and file newsroom people. I think what separates Scandinavia from the rest of the world is just the totality of the cultureship, the depth inside of newsrooms, and it's a different ballgame. I had the honor, Aftenposten did their morning editorial meeting in English for me, at which it was just a 15-minute meeting, but in the 15 minutes, I'd say 10 of those 15 minutes were spent on, subscription triggers, page views, audience, propensity to be shared on social media, really smart talk about what this morning's content did for the business.
I agree with all of that, but I would add that in most newsrooms we found that journalists and editors really have embraced and are excited about the change from spots and dots and eyeballs and delivering mass audience to advertisers to that of engaging their best users, their best subscribers. And that is not a kind of a foreign idea, but a return to the original purpose and excitement of their journalism, which is to generate an audience and get feedback.
David, because you mentioned right at the beginning about sort of that, advertising was never really connected directly to the journalism, and so I assume you're in favor of all this, and that's throughout the Times?
Yeah, I'm not close enough to the day-to-day operations within the newsroom to speak directly to that, but I can say, to echo what Jim's saying, I think it's exciting to create something worth paying for, which is different than creating something that hopefully some advertiser will be interested in advertising against, and I think that's something that everybody can rally around, and then it's about finding the right level of clarity and transparency for the journalists and editors so that they can understand how to maximize the impact of their work without having them over-rotate on the data.
So what if the thing I always think about is the City Hall story? It checks a lot of the boxes, but it might not ever check the sufficiency box of turning people into digital subscribers. but it's important to the community. You feel a responsibility to. How does that, though, what happens if those stories don't wind up driving enough conversions, but you might feel it's a part of the mission of the news organization?
Well, I think that's a real challenge. We found when we reorganized a lot of our beats to try to be more reader-focused, and we tried to take our state, we're the state capital, so we tried to take our state government coverage and change it so that we thought it would be more reader-focused, and what we found was it didn't move the needle at all, and nobody was reading the stuff. So, we're coming to two realizations. One is, yes, there's important journalism that you have to do that may not trigger audience, but the other is we also have to keep experimenting with that coverage and how we're telling those stories. And perhaps we just haven't found the right voice or the right methods for telling those kinds of stories, and perhaps we're still not completely reader-focused to understand how do you make a state government budget interesting, because it's important, but it is not the first thing people are going to click on. So I think there's two parts of that. And if I can also speak to that cultural piece, I think the other piece on this moving journalists to be very connected to those buying activities has brought a whole different hope into newsrooms. Think about prior to this evolution, all journalists are thinking about is print is declining, my newsroom is getting smaller, there's empty desks everywhere. I have this sense of doom and no future. We're just winding down to the waterline. When in comes this idea of you have control of your audience, you can connect, and now not only that, you have control of funding your own organization. It has brought enthusiasm and hope and excitement into newsrooms that didn't have that previously.
And the transparency of data is so important to motivating journalists, editors, et cetera. I was a journalist 35 years ago. I'll pick on Jim because you're sitting next to me. Jim, congratulations on that article this morning. We got 1,000 more eyeballs for that JCPenney's ad. That doesn't motivate. That doesn't motivate me. And there's something pure about what's happening here, and I think that's the revolution. It literally is. It's a reader revolution, subscriber revolution, but it's a newsroom revolution.
Absolutely.
Jim, but I'm going to go to the audience right after this, but not for profit. Look, we talked about the Texas Tribune, and it's probably the best model I've seen across the country in terms of actually going from a few people to continuing to scale up. What can nonprofit sources really do for metropolitan, large, medium-sized newsrooms, even small? What can it do? What should it be doing? How can we be accessing it? Everybody here in the room who has philanthropic sources in their communities, in their countries?
The nonprofit model in Philadelphia is first and foremost a way of reaching out to the community, saying this is a cherished community asset. It's a great city deserves a great newspaper. You support the art museum. You support the orchestra. You are concerned about schools, the opioid crisis. Support the newspaper. And that is, I think, there's a unique set of circumstances. First was a billionaire benefactor who saw it this way. The second was the fact that the Inquirer had regrettably been through 7 different hands in 7 or 8 years. So this was, the stars kind of lined up in that particular city. The notion that local families, including yours, or local investors in Boston or Minneapolis or now hopefully Los Angeles can support the local newspaper as a for-profit, I think that's equally valid. There's something about a local owner who is in it for the right reasons that is the core. The capital structure and the legal structure around non-for-profit, I think, is really secondary to those things.
Okay. Let's open it up for questions, and I can come back to the group with some if we don't have. But how about questions from?
There are mics on both sides.
Yeah. So, can somebody help me here? I can't see too well. So, questions?
RB has first that.
RB, please.
Yes. Hi, I'm RB Brenner. I'm the director of the journalism school here. And one thing I haven't heard you talk about is For about 8 years, I've been teaching, and I ask students, raise your hand if you do.
The mic's not working.
I don't think so.
Is it not?
I ask them, raise your hand if you do any kind of destination news. Forget subscriptions, just going regularly to a website, and there's a scattering of hands. I ask them how many just get your news on some form of social media platform. What's in your Twitter feed, what's on your Facebook page, and most of the hands go up in the room. And I'm not convinced that it's just a generational thing. I think it's a lot of people. So with that, how do you then begin to even change that habit so people can move down your spectrum to actually be an engaged customer?
You want to start with this one?
I think we appreciate we're never really going to get them to come to our homepage. So people who still talk to us about, oh, but the homepage needs to be this, it needs to be that, like, well, okay, but nobody's really coming to the homepage. So the idea is, how can we get you to connect with some of our other products that are probably more push-oriented, that will help us get a closer relationship with you? Or can we get you to follow us on Twitter, and can we use Twitter then to push you to an email newsletter? And can we use the email newsletter then to help you understand that by having fuller access to our complete suite of products that are digital, will that move you in? And we're even working with sort of our older core loyal audience to try to pull them from print to our replica e-edition, which they seem to like, and then can we get them to Facebook? So I think that we just have to use every product to try to keep bringing you closer and closer and get you into some of our...
I just think your challenge there is a lot of them don't even know that it was your story.
Right.
Because there's so much stuff coming through that pipe.
Yeah, it's a challenge, absolutely.
I know when we released our Path Forward, one of the statements we made is that we wanted to be the best news destination in the world. And so I think it was a very conscious choice to say we want people coming directly to us. That doesn't mean that everybody needs to, and that most people will still come through side channels and Google, Facebook, Twitter, you name it. And so, it's through thinking about things of how do we make that news browsing experience truly unique and compelling? How do we get people hooked on the idea that there's more compelling stories that they're missing if they don't come? It's about thinking about things like, hey, during the big stories and the big moments, how do we convince people the Times is where you go to actually read, whether it's election results or a hurricane or whatever that might be. And I think that said, it's also little tactics like how do you get people hooked on the newsletter or following you on Facebook. And so I think it's about thinking about all of those things. But ultimately, if you're going to have a subscription business, you have to believe that people are going to want to have you on their home screen or a tap away. Otherwise, the relationship is going to be with the platform.
A question right here?
Yeah. Henrik Ornebring from Karlstad University, Sweden. I think you can hear me, right?
We are broadcasting to millions of people all over the world.
No pressure.
So no pressure, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So first of all, Earl, great to hear you talking about Sweden. I get this feeling that you get when they mention your hometown on TV. But one thing that you were all saying, that Sarah was saying it, David was saying it, Earl was saying it, was that the newspaper was always more than news. It was the crossword puzzle, the recipes, the classified ads, everything. And Earl mentioned, there's a lot of things that you can sell that trigger subscriptions. If you're an infrequent user, you want summaries. If you're a news junkie, you want the in-depth stuff. And this strikes me, this is like a return to the newspaper business model of 100 years ago, the omnibus newspaper, which had a little bit of everything for everyone. And just 5-10 years ago, in panels like this, people would much more talk about that model is dead. It's a fragmented audience. People want specific things. What's the magic bullet content that we can give people? Is in-depth news the magic bullet? Is sports the magic bullet? And now all of a sudden you're or maybe not all of a sudden, but now you're talking about, no, we have a lot of everything, so we can sell this thing to this group and this thing to this group. What changed?
I don't know that anything really changed, except that I think the data we're not really trying to be everything to everybody, but the data allows us to understand what are the content pieces that our audience is connecting with, and that could be, we know in Raleigh that there's a lot of the national news and there's a lot of the like NFL sports that does not connect with our audience. So we just aren't going to do that. There's a lot of arts reviews, theater reviews that in our market, nobody's going to read them, so we don't do them. But what we will do is anything that connects with an audience. So it seems like disparate content, but it's really just watching the data and understanding those are the things that are connecting.
I think there's a difference between the view that the newspaper is the newspaper of record in a given city, that it has to cover everything, that it's all things to all people, the general store, and the view that there's only a small handful of key content categories that really, really matter. Most newspapers that are selling digital subscriptions successfully have 4 or 5 major franchises. The investigative news, enterprise news that people care most about and that most influences the city, it sometimes doesn't have the page views and the traffic that sports would have. Sports is almost always another major category. In Philadelphia, to our maybe not surprise, but our delight, the food coverage has an enormous amount of traffic. So it's really, I think, about focusing in on 4 or 5 big franchises that drive traffic, as opposed to believing that we're all things to all people.
The number one question I get on the road in the last 6 months is, how many newsletters does a typical newspaper have? And the first time I got the question, I was just caught flat-footed. That's either the dumbest or most brilliant question I've ever heard. And then I kept getting it over and over and over, and it was organic. And so I start drilling down, and the dumb old newsletter, if we're going to circumvent, social media traffic, SEO traffic, it's a highly engaged audience. Boston Globe supposedly has 30-plus newsletters aimed at their subscribers. News Corp Australia has 11. I drill down a little bit, and you say 4 or 5 passion subjects. If it's algorithmically built, I think they've got a National Rugby League newsletter. They've got a Letters to the Editor daily newsletter. What do we care how they or why they come in the front door or which door they come in? If that's the entry piece to the New York Times, God bless. My father's 87 years old. If there wasn't a daily obituary newsletter, he'd be in.
Question over here. I think we have one more.
I have a question about engagement. Y'all were talking about sustainability versus like clickbait. Like in TV news, I know anything crime-related, bloody on digital does really well. But I'm curious about your data on what you're seeing so far as to the stories that really will bring folks in for real memberships that aren't just clickbait, I guess.
What we found most helpful is habitual use. You're trying to get someone to be there 5, 10, 15 times a month. Newsletters are a very important part of that pathway. And sometimes it's real estate, sometimes it's crime, sometimes it's City Hall. The beauty of the meter is that you let and sometimes it's obituaries. The beauty of the meter is it lets the reader decide what he or she finds most compelling. But it's this habitual, regular use. It's why service journalism, things like the 7-minute workout or whatever it is in the New York Times, the health coverage, these kinds of things, television coverage, which is big for you, create that kind of habit that triggers actual payment. Much more so than investigative news. Investigative news, though, is critical to the brand and critical to people's view of why they're paying.
I would just say that there are just areas of passion. I think it's about tapping into passion points. It's not about a headline that just grips somebody. It's, people care about being healthy. They care about politics. They care about, wars and what's going on. I mean, it's, and you got to figure out the right angle for the audience to make sure that it's compelling to them. But these are real issues that I think, the thing that I find so exciting about where we are today is that these are things that before we felt like advertising was paying for, and that there were areas that were, kind of like really driving the business that were more kind of, I would call kind of ad generous. And actually, if you can nail the right news, that's the stuff people are really paying for. And it's about figuring out those passion areas.
It's also interesting that there can be some surprises when you start playing with content and understanding what people connect with. And one of the real surprises we had was that we started covering our local television news media, really just what the television stations are doing, and that is huge with audience.
And just one point, be true to your values. I don't think the New York Times coming up with a Kardashian story makes a lot of sense. Neither do I think that the National Enquirer should come up with food standards stories. So I'm just saying, let's not generalize, kind of what Sarah was saying in her presentation earlier, let's not generalize about all media. Farm industry, popular media, quality media, local media, they all have their own unique thing, and just be true to the values.
I wanted to make a point to the gentleman's comment in the front row, and this kind of ends where you began, and that is that we do need to have direct contact and direct access to our own subscribers and our own readers through newsletters, through subscriptions, et cetera. But equally, most current and future readers are coming to us through Facebook, Google, increasingly through Snapchat, through aggregators like Apple News. And it's really up to us to play well with them and to take advantage of their genuine concern with what's happening in particular local media. Both Facebook and Google have very real initiatives with very real money and certainly real expertise devoted to the notion of how to get people to subscribe to local news. It's in their interest because it's in their interest to keep this ecosystem healthy enough to keep their platforms healthy. But they're not only a threat, they're also an enormous opportunity. And the better we can interact and integrate with them, the better off we'll all be.
Hey, last question.
Yeah, Katie Camp, Cox Media Group, Orlando. So I am on the broadcast side of things, just TV and radio. But I was wondering, this question is actually more for Earl. When you talk about paid subscriptions, where do you see that going for broadcast digital?
Everything is merging together. I think in 10 years, what's the difference between broadcast, digital, magazine, media, newspaper media? It's all really coming together. I'm no expert on broadcast. I know that at the end of the day, it is about brand love. And if your news brand or your entertainment brand is not loved, you're not going to get the loyal people to pay you money. If your mission is not aligned with that, you will not succeed in this new world that Spotify and Netflix, to some degree, is doing the blocking and tackling for us right now. That's a broad answer. I'm happy to talk with you later in the break, but that's my broad answer.
I think you're going to have as long as political advertising and retransmission dollars are going into local television stations, they're not going to need that extra revenue. And because there's going to be 3 and 4 competitors at least in every market, nobody's going to be the first one to put a meter up on their site in their market. So I think it's easily 5 to 7 years away before you'll see any mass adoption of meters by local news broadcaster, television broadcasters. My opinion. Okay, I know we're out of time. Thank you for our panel. Thank all of you all for being here. Thank all of you all.
Obituaries were the #1 trigger for the Press Plus meter.
Oh, yeah?
Okay, we have to start again. I think we began with a very, very strong keynote panel, and I think the segue will be perfect for that. But I do want to show you one thing before we start the next session. I want to show you the Denver Post editorial that has been mentioned here by Jim, and I don't know if you saw that, but I think this is a dramatic picture of the devastation of the newspaper industry in this country that is so dramatic for democracy, for journalism, etc. The Denver Post published this editorial with this photo, which is actually a very good use of the medium, right? That shows the newsroom in 2013 when they got a Pulitzer Prize. And then, when you slide, you see the dramatic shrinking of the newsroom. And like Jim said, this is an editorial. I consider this a sort of a historic editorial because it is talking about one newspaper, but in reality, it's talking about the whole problem of the newspaper industry. And this conference has been talking about this for almost 20 years, talking about the financial impact of the digital revolution on the newspaper industry and its consequences for this country and democracy. So I invite you to read this editorial and to understand the situation that newspapers all over the country who have been, newspapers that have been bought by hedge funds and companies that are not anymore the local companies with the connection with the local communities. And this rebellion, I think, will enter the history of newspapers in this country. So having said that, let us move to the next panel. The next panel is related to this. It's about how newspapers, how news organizations are trying to find other business models, other ways to make money. So I think it was a good segue to the post-advertising idea that was on the previous keynote panel. So I'm going to introduce you to Janine Warner. Janine is an ISOJer since the very beginning. Janine came to the first ISOJ 19 years ago, and she has been coming here for many times after that, and she has created Sembra Media with me, who is here, which is a network of new entrepreneurial journalism initiatives in Latin America and Spain. So Janine, you have the floor and the leadership.
I have to start by just saying thank you, Rosenthal. Give an applause to this marvelous man. It is such a pleasure to be here with so many friends. I'm Janine Warner. I have a Knight Fellowship from the International Center for Journalists. And as Rosenthal mentioned, I'm the co-founder of Sembra Media with Michal Estrebner, who is here with me from Argentina. We have an incredible panel for you today and a really nice segue to talk about newspaper subscriptions. We're going to talk today mostly on this panel about donations and other diversified revenue sources for what we call digital media. Independent digital native media will be much of the focus of this. I will briefly tell you about the amazing lineup of speakers we have and then move to, I think I just moved the PowerPoint the wrong way, Mallory. She's going to teach me how to use this, and then I'm going to move forward. So I'll briefly tell you about each of the speakers, and then I'll talk a little bit about what we do at Sembra Media, and then we'll have each of the speakers give a 10-minute presentation. And based on the conversations I've had with them before, we'll have a very dynamic conversation afterwards. So Alex is the founder of Press Patron. Press patron is, it's still not changing, Mallory. Okay, cool. Alex is the founder of Press Patron, which is a donation tool that lets you put little donate buttons all over the website and then uses data collected from that to understand which content areas are driving revenue. So let's go back to the Press Patron so you can have a sense of that. Thank you for getting all the technology. Those who don't know Mallory over here on the left doing a great job. Thank you. Our second speaker is April Hinkle, who is the Chief Revenue Officer at the Texas Tribune. I don't have to tell you, it is one of the runaway success stories in the nonprofit digital media world in the US. They raise millions of dollars every year through events, through donations, through sponsors, through all kinds of things. She's going to share some of the ways we do that as she speaks. We also have Christina C. Christina She is from the News Revenue Hub. One of the panelists on the previous panel mentioned them. They're born out of the Voice of San Diego. And VOSD got so good at getting donations that they spun off the News Revenue Hub. They had so many people come to them and say, show us how you're raising millions of dollars from donors, that they actually launched their own separate organization that just does that for other media. And she will tell you how much money they're helping other media make. And then finally, Rob Lindberg. I know a lot of you have seen his work from The Correspondent. Started in Amsterdam, Holland, and he's now in New York, trying to figure out if we can spread that to the rest of the world. He launched The Correspondent with a record-breaking $1.7 million crowdfunding campaign. So I think with Jay Rosen and some of the other people supporting him in New York, we also can expect big things from him. So before each of them talk, I just want to say all of us agree that diversified revenue is not only important in terms of making your business sustainable, but for some of us who work in countries where independent media is particularly challenging, we think it's the key to independence. And I run an organization called Sembra Media because we sembramos medios. We grow, we nurture, we support all of these amazing new media sites, some of them not so new, some of them 20 years old now, that were started by journalists who often, despite their great understanding of their audiences and their desire to meet a need in the community, are generally not as good at business as we think they could be. And so our focus is to help them with sustainability and to share best practices. And we started 2.5 years ago, very much born out of the work I've done with Rosenthal and the wonderful MOOCs that you do here, by mapping the Spanish language digital native marketplace. And over 2.5 years with a really diverse team, we've identified more than 750 digital media sites that meet our relatively strict criteria, which we publish in English and Spanish on our site. You can search them by country, by content type, and the goal of this directory is to help other entrepreneurs see what's out there before they get started, find potential partners. We want to help funders and investors to identify who are the sites that they should really be paying attention to. In December, we launched an online school because the #1 thing we get from journalists is show me how, teach me how, especially how to make money. So we have a whole section on how to make money, marketing, management, and other things that we think can round out that journalism education. When I talk about Sembra Media, I have to acknowledge there's an incredible team that has come together. Midge and I run a virtual organization. I'm based in Los Angeles. She's based in Argentina. And this incredible group of people come from 16 other countries in the Spanish-speaking world to help us understand, support, and research the media that we study. I was here last year to give kind of a sneak preview of a study we published a few months later called the Inflection Point Report. I'm just going to share 3 key points from that to give context to this panel. We looked at 100 different media sites, did very deep interviews with the founders or the directors about their impact, their opportunities, how they make money, and how they spend money. And because we had a team of journalists from their countries who knew them well, we were able to get people to answer those questions. And then if you've ever done a project like this, we have 130 questions and 100 interviews. We spent a lot of time kind of sorting through the data and figuring out what it meant, and analyzed and broke into 4 different categories these digital media sites, and really tried to study how they were making money at different stages of development and audience size, and what we could learn from that that could be helpful to others. Along the way, we found, and not a surprise to many of you in diversified revenue, more than 15 different ways they're making money. I've seen lists of 52. I try to categorize them in my own way. But what I want to show you here is that among digital native media, advertising is still important. It is not the only thing, it's not the only thing that works, but especially at the high end, if you have a lot of traffic, it does still have relevance. The agency model of producing branded content, doing consulting service as a complement is working well. Donations are the place we think is the greatest future. And the idea that people will not pay for quality content on the internet is a lie. I think we are proving this morning at ISOJ. If you produce quality content that's relevant to people's lives, they will pay you for it and they will help you do it. And this panel will be another chance for you to see how that's working in digital natives. 2 quick examples. In Ecuador, where my heart goes out to the 3 journalists who I've met and who we have lost, there is an independent digital media site that has been watching that story closely, G-Kill City. And they've been really smart about creating a local news site and a digital content agency, and the money they make from producing content for non-writers and their supporters and sponsors, producing content for those sites, is really driving the money they need to produce their local news site. And their local news site is not a bad advertisement and credibility booster for their digital agency. So we're seeing symbiotic relationships like that. In Bolivia, there's an environmental news site. Within our directory, there are many environmental news sites. It's one of the hardest categories to monetize. But what we found is if you have a travel site that goes with your environmental news site, they can be very complementary, and the one can really help you support the other. So these are the kinds of best practices we study, we write case studies about, we develop courses about, and we try and share throughout the region. I want to share with you one of the statistics that really jumped out from our study, and perhaps one of the ones that's gotten more attention than the others because it so validates what some of us know. If you are a journalist running your own news organization and you are the only one raising money for your own news organization, you're probably not doing as well as you could. When we looked at all that data, and I said, okay, all the people who actually said, yes, I pay somebody in sales or business, how much money did they make versus the people who don't pay anybody there? The average size team was 10 people in content, 1 in technology, and effectively 0 in sales, because it's usually the founder. But the ones who did actually pay someone in sales drove their median revenue by a factor I can't even give you a percentage for. The difference between $3,900 and $117,000 in median revenue in Argentina, Colombia, Mexico, and Brazil, where we did this study, is a dramatic finding and confirmation for me that you really have to have somebody on sales. The last thing I'll share with you, just because it so amazed us and we weren't even looking for it, was that when we added up the founders, and most of these sites have 2 to 4 founders, when we added up all the founders of all these sites, we found that 40% of them were women. In Latin America, most traditional media is less than 1% female-owned. The fact that the independent media is emerging as a place where women's voices and women's leadership is having significant impact is something we continue to study and are very excited to learn about. I have a few last things for your eyes only, but it's time for our panel to tell you more about what they do. So I'd like to bring Alex up first. As I told you, Alex is from Press Patron. He's going to talk to us about his experience helping digital media drive donations. Take it away, Alex.
So good morning. It's awesome to be back in Austin and incredible to be here with Rosenthal and his talented team. It's really awesome what they've been doing here. I'm here to talk about my master's research and also about the funding platform Press Patron. But to begin, I'd like us to consider some of the reasons why journalism's so important. And I know I'm preaching to the converted here, but it's a good place for us to start. So journalism helps us to answer life's big questions, the kind of stuff that keeps us up at night. It informs us about things that matter, the issues of life and death. It gives us useful life tips so that we can grow as individuals. It brings communities together so that we can learn to understand each other. And it strengthens our democracy by helping us make informed decisions as citizens. So it is easy to be cynical, and it's easy to laugh about how bad things have become. But how did we get to this place? As you already know, the journalism community has been going through a period of unprecedented crisis. To begin, advertising revenues collapsed by more than 2/3 in the space of a decade. Then, readers began cancelling their print subscriptions by around 10 to 15% each year. When the revenues decreased, journalists were fired. And in the US, nearly half of journalists have lost their jobs since 2006. To make things even worse, online advertising has created perverse economic incentives for low-quality content. Journalists have been encouraged to maximize clicks and page views with populist stories, and unless we get readers to pay for news again, we're destroying the feedback loop that used to exist between quality and revenue. So, how can we fix journalism? Thankfully, people are still willing to pay for high-quality reporting about topics that matter. What we need to do is make it as easy as possible. So for my master's research, I asked consumers about their willingness to pay for journalism under a whole range of different business models. Quite surprisingly, it turned out more people are willing to make donations voluntarily than pay for content that is restricted and locked up behind paywalls. So you don't need to lock content up, you just need to prioritize quality and earn the respect of your audience. To turn this research into action, I founded a funding platform called Press Patron to make the donation process as easy as possible for both readers and the publishers. In New Zealand and Australia, we now have a community of more than 25 websites, and across these websites, there's a unique audience of about 800,000 visitors per month. Now, Press Patron embeds directly into the websites of our media partners through a line of code. And once it's integrated, it appears as a promotional banner along the top of each page, and you can also embed it as a payment button at the bottom of each article. When the button's clicked, the sign-up process is activated immediately with a small call to action message from the publisher. The supporter then chooses the amount and the frequency of their payment under a model that's completely pay what you want. You then enter the name, email, and credit card number. And finally, at the end of the process, after paying, you have the option of creating an account if you want to manage your payment preferences. And you get an overview of all the publishers that you support within the network, and you have full control over your payment preferences. Now, very recently, we started taking the donation data to see which stories are having the highest level of success, and we created this recommendation tool that in real time creates a positive feedback loop. And we're recreating that direct link between quality and revenue. And across our community of sites, we've got a diverse range of sites that include investigative journalism, community bloggers, traditional publishing companies, as well as indigenous media and others. So some insights from our launch. We've confirmed that there's a higher uptake than the industry averages for paywalls. The sites that launched about a year ago have already exceeded 1% of their unique audience becoming a supporter, and that's still growing each month. And the most successful ones have been as high as 5%. Half of the supporters are opting into recurring monthly revenue. And on top of that, the retention rates are extremely high. At the moment, only approximately 1.4% are cancelling each month. And on top of this, the monthly averages are high. So we've got $11 per month for recurring contributions and $49 for one-time contributions. And that's in New Zealand dollars, so you can see the conversion rate there. Other insights from our launch. So quality journalism does receive the highest level of support. There's a direct link between investigative reporting and large boosts in donations. And news organizations need to prioritize quality rather than clicks. So why do people become supporters? Oh, sorry. So what do people actually think about the platform itself? The biggest feedback that we get is that it's nice and easy. Why do people donate in the first place? This is a values-based transaction. It's based on the economics of generosity rather than a traditional transactional approach. And why not paywalls? It's because people want to support the underlying mission of journalism and people don't actually want to see that content restricted from having maximum impact. And just re-emphasizing what the panel was talking about this morning, the absolute importance is the core mission of journalism. It's high-quality investigations and other types of reporting. So to close, I'd like us to think again, why does journalism matter? And I'm going to use some examples of articles that in New Zealand have had the highest level of success through the Press Patron platform. So journalism highlights corruption, and it holds our politicians to account. It exposes abuses of power, and it gives a voice to the people that have been wronged and disempowered by others. It informs us about issues that matter, so that we can find solutions together. And it encourages compassion by showing us life from other perspectives. Most importantly, all of these things empower us to reach our full potential as a society and bring an end to injustices. If you'd like to learn more about my master's research or the Press Patron platform, it would be great to have a chat either during the conference or send me an email if you'd like to catch up directly. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead. Oh, yeah, get that to April. Next up, we have April Hinkle from the Texas Tribune. Before joining the Trib, she was at Texas Monthly as an advertising director and ultimately the publisher. She's a UT alum, and she runs the Speakers Bureau licensing of content and many other parts of the revenue, multi-million-dollar revenue model at Texas Tribune. Thank you so much for being with us, April.
Push which one? The right one. Uh-oh, I missed one. There we go. Good morning. Before I talk about the Texas Tribune, I have to share a few things about Texas with you. So Texas is the only state in the union to have first been a country. And if Texas was a country today, we would represent the 14th largest economy in the world. Texas is big. Small towns, 254 counties, and major metropolitan areas. Texas claims 3 of the top 10 and 6 of the top 20 markets in the U.S. And the special thing about Texas is that Texas is a cohesive state. We're Texans first. We're proud to be Texans, and we care about what happens in Texas. The Texas Tribune was launched in November of 2009 based on the decline on traditional journalism. The media had stopped covering our statewide issues. The Texas Tribune is a nonprofit, nonpartisan news organization. We publish enterprise and beat reporting, columns, podcasts, newscasts, event videos, and more, all found on our destination news site, texastribune.org. The Texas Tribune has won a Peabody and 13 National Murrow Awards. Yeah, it's pretty great. And many call us the leader in public journalism in the United States. One thing I should have said, going back to being Texas a cohesive state, it doesn't matter if you're from Dallas or Dimebox, Corsicana or Corpus Christi. We care about our state's biggest issues, and that's what the Tribune covers. Public education, higher education, healthcare, transportation, immigration, energy, the economy, and much, much more. Since 2009, we've raised over $51 million to support an ambitious newsroom. And from the start, the business model has not changed. It's a diversified one, guaranteeing sustainability and success. Foundations, individuals, members, corporations, and other creative revenue sources support the newsroom. Now, Janine asked me to give a couple of examples. I think there's things that we all have in common. Take digital products, ad banners, voicemail messaging, email messaging, sponsored content, right? But the uniqueness about the Tribune, I'll give you 2 case studies. The first one is licensing of content. You want me to come out here? Okay. So, as a nonprofit news organization, all of the content that we create is given away to other media. We believe that smarter Texans create a better Texas. We do, though, license our content for documentary films, textbooks, coffee table books, and we've even licensed video for music. In the 4th and 7th grade, Texans take and they study Texas history. About 6 years ago, the Higher Education Coordinating Board in Texas changed the government sequence to graduate from public colleges and universities. Now all students must take a Texas government course. It didn't take the publishing division of Pearson long to get to Texas, and they started talking to professors all over the state. And one thing they heard over and over and over again in every conversation was mentioning the Texas Tribune. So we got the call. The first thing we talked about was our polling data. Then we quickly licensed our content to create their first Evergreen Texas textbook. From here, we added online learning labs based on Texas Tribune current content. Right now, we're developing a next generation Texas Experience digital platform with Pearson. And two things are important, and this will actually go on sale next year, but two things are really important. One is part of the mission of the Tribune is that we have to embrace the youth of our state because we know our future belongs to them. This product puts our brand in front of, and our content in the hands of hundreds of thousands of college students each year. And here's the thing. The revenue's pretty good too, especially for content that we're already creating. So this licensing opportunity with Pearson represents upfront $280,000, and over the next 5 years, the Texas Tribune will earn a revenue share from every unit sold. It's pretty impressive. The next thing I think that sets us apart as well are events. There's not an organization, a news organization that comes to our office, whether it's nonprofit or for-profit, that doesn't ask about our events and how we're monetizing editorial events. The first thing is, from the very start, events were very important to the Tribune and in the original business plan. We believe that people need to come together to discuss, respectfully discuss, our state's biggest issues. So we present these events to bring them together to do just that from all points of view. Last year, the Texas Tribune presented 62 events, 27 conversations here in Austin, 8 around the state, themed series, one day, one topic symposiums, 4 of those, and a Big Ideas Festival. And they all are editorial events. You come and attend in person. If you can't make it, then the content is streamed on our site in real time. After the event, the video is posted, promoted, and then archived on our site forever. The audio file is also transitioned to a podcast form found on all of our channels. We have amazing sponsors that support these events. They are free to attend, public record, and open to the public. We create wonderful, general, basic benefits for everybody because we don't want to spend our time there. We want to understand each sponsor's purpose for supporting that event and create custom elements around a point of engagement and a direct takeaway. Our sponsors also understand that they have no influence in the discussion or the participants on this stage. They are truly editorial events. So the jewel in our event crown is the Big Texas Tribune Festival. It's been held here on campus for the last 7 years, and this year we're transitioning the festival to downtown Austin. That will allow us to offer a complete second day of programming. Last year, in 2017, the Texas Tribune Festival presented 10 tracks, 65 programs. We had 250 plus speakers, 80 sponsors and media partners, and almost 5,000 people attend in person, while over 112,000 viewed the festival online. So I'm going to give y'all a look at it. Maybe. This is the best part. And the last thing I'll say is that we believe that editorial events, the juice is definitely worth the squeeze. In 2018, our event sponsorship goal is $1.9 million. And over the course of the festival weekend, we'll secure $1 million of it. Thank you.
Next up is Christina Shih, originally from the Voice of San Diego, now the COO of the News Revenue Hub, and she's going to talk about how she raises millions of dollars for digital media.
Hi, can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thanks so much for having me here today. Oh, sorry. Here, let me just take off my jacket. Thank you. Thanks so much for having me here today. I'm Christina. I'm with the News Revenue Hub, and let's just dive right into it. I wanted to start with something that Sarah Fisher from Axios wrote back in November. She said, "There's no question that the media is facing unprecedented disruption at this moment." And what we found at the Hub is that reader expectations are changing too. And something that was said earlier today, people are willing to support the news that they value and trust. But news organizations have to make the case for it. So a little bit about what we do. We help digital news organizations build membership programs, and we provide the front-end strategy and the back-end technology to make this all happen. Our strategy is heavily focused on building meaningful relationships with readers, and our tech stack is designed to automate the critical but really tedious tasks that are necessary to fundraising. And I think our origin story has also been said earlier today, but we were born out of the nonprofit space. Our founding team came from Voice of San Diego, and our director of client relationships came from the Texas Tribune. And when we were at Voice, we created a membership program that made up about 25% of our annual budget. And over the years, people would call us all the time asking, "Hey, what CRM are you guys using?" Or "How do you run a spring campaign?" And we would share advice and our best practices, but once the conversation was over, folks would go back to their own newsrooms just really unsure of how to begin or how to actually implement these ideas. So in November 2016, we took on 5 digital news organizations. We gave them all of our tools, we walked them through the fundamentals of membership, and we really embedded ourselves in their development departments. So today we work with 16 news organizations, and our approach has been scaled across this diverse group of newsrooms. And one of my favorite things about the Hub is that no one goes at it alone. Our big picture goal is to solve the problems that the entire industry is facing. So we experiment, we learn, we research, and we test, and whatever we find is working, we try to scale it across our cohort. And so today, since we've launched in 2016, we've helped our clients raise $4.3 million in revenue. $3 million is money that's in the bank. That's money that they have now that they can use. And then $1.3 million is predictable revenue. So if somebody gives $10 a month, that all adds up. And so for the first time, some of our clients are able to see money that's going to come in July, August, September, and be able to plan for their operations. We also help our clients increase their subscriber database, as email is a huge part of what we do. And the results are game-changing. Whether our clients are nonprofits, for-profits, local, startup, legacy, topical, whatever, all of them have seen results out the gate. And our smallest org, you can see, raised $90,000 in their first year, and that's game-changing for them. And so today, since we're talking about different forms of revenue, I want to pause for a second and explain why we love membership at the Hub. So the first thing to know about our clients is that all of their editorial content is free and accessible to everybody. There's no paywalls, there's no subscriptions. And the way we think about it is, if you're telling somebody it costs us this much to access our content, the second they hand over the money, the transaction ends. But if you flip it around and you make your content free, you now ask your reader, how much do you think our reporting is worth? And you now have the opportunity to unlock so much more potential. People might give more than what you might be asking for. And you also now have the chance to regularly communicate with your readers and talk to them about how your business model works and the role that they play in the future of your organization. And so, I mean, this concept is simple. It's just building relationships and talking to your readers regularly. But it takes a lot of ongoing work. And it's not easy and somewhat uncomfortable for people who've never been this open and candid about the financial realities of running a newsroom. So I'm going to tell you everything about our membership strategy. And if 1998 Tom Hanks is giving you clues to what the secret ingredient is, it's email. So email is one of the most powerful tools that you have. You can use email to become a part of your reader's daily or weekly routine. If you don't have an email newsletter product, create one. Make it a quality product with standout content and a distinct voice, a regular routine, so somebody can build a habit off of it, and use it, as a way to engage with their readers. So when I was at Voice, I checked our info box, just the thing that people would reply to all of the time, and most of the emails were complaints and spam, but you also had a really good majority of people who genuinely wanted to offer feedback, tips, or just comment on a story. And this type of engaged readership is not unique. So the first thing we have all of our clients do is take advantage of this email list. And they create something that we call a Get to Know You series or a welcome campaign. And the point of a welcome campaign is, over the course of a few emails, the reader is going to start to learn and understand the basics and fundamentals of your organization. Your mission, your purpose, what you do, why you exist. And they're going to become really ingrained in everything that you do. So this is an example from an organization in San Antonio that we work with, the Rivard Report. And so, think of this as another form of your about page and add a little bit of value to it. So here she's introducing herself. You have the picture, Jenna. You already have a connection with her. You're starting to build a relationship. And then she just lays it all out. I want to give you a picture of our history. So their origin story, their goals, their value propositions, and guiding principles as a nonprofit newsroom. Now, these emails are so important because they will also prime your readers to actually donate. So if you're a nonprofit or your community is supported, slip that in. But it's really important for people to understand this, that this is core to your business model. And then you can make it more than a one-way channel. Invite readers to offer feedback or ask questions, or you can even embed a survey in one of these. And so here, she again is saying that I invite you to join our community of supporters and mentions membership. And ideally, in the end, this all culminates in an explicit appeal. And by the time you're ready to ask for a contribution, your readers will already understand why you're deserving of their support. And it's also important to help connect the dots. Most readers don't understand that their donation has a direct impact on your reporting, and your reporting has a direct impact on conversations happening in the community, policy, or whatever. And similar to going back to the quote that we opened up with, this unprecedented disruption, most readers that probably don't realize what the entire industry has gone through, that traditional business models have crumbled, that we can no longer rely on advertising. So explain it and be clear about the role that they have as a news consumer. So this is an example of a pitch that we tie back to the editorial content. So anytime one of our clients writes a story of impact, one that encapsulates the idea of this is why we exist, this is why we're here, we help them make an appeal out of it. So this is from the Lens in New Orleans, and last spring they wrote a story about DAs issuing fake subpoenas. And I mean, the teaser copy is literally, this is why we're here. And then in the pitch, it only takes 3 sentences to summarize the story, and we come in with the close, if not for our reporting, these questionable subpoenas may not have come to light. I don't know what's more powerful than that. And then we call out the donate button, like this is the point of this email. It has value, you learn something about it, but you also understand you need to support the organization. So that's pretty much our membership strategy, and I want to end with this. For those who are thinking about trying to raise money off of readers, there are no get sustainable quick schemes. Honest, open conversation takes ongoing work, but it is so worth it. And stay focused, focus on what only moves the needle. Don't get distracted by shiny things or new things or new initiatives, and always think about, is this going to drive revenue? Is this going to increase the list of our email subscribers? And then a lot of clients, they cripple themselves before they even get a chance to start. The stars will never align. You're never going to have like the biggest, baddest database or the best staff. You just got to start. There's so much money on the table, so don't be afraid to just go. And then finally, membership is only part of it. Healthy news organizations need diversified revenue streams. And so that's why I'm really looking forward to the conversation that we're going to have now about all the different ways that our news organizations can raise money. Thank you.
Very proud to have the translation simultaneously, but I want to ask people who are using the devices to lower the volume, because it's very high in many areas of the auditorium. So, para ustedes que están usando el aparatito, baje el volumen. Solo el necesario para usted, no necesita que los otros escuchen.
Los que podemos escuchar, los dos nos confunde. Bueno, the next speaker is Rob Winberg. As many of you know, he's the founder of De Correspondent from Holland, which he started there in 2013. He's built that to more than 60,000 members, and he's now launching that in New York. Prior to that, he was the youngest editor-in-chief of a national newspaper in Europe when he started at 27, running the Dutch daily NRC. I'm looking forward to learning more about what he's going to do with De Correspondent.
Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me? Is my mic on? It is. Okay, good. Thank you for hosting me here in the wonderful city of Austin. I'm going to talk fast because I have a lot to tell you and just a little bit of time to do so. So bear with me, and also apologies to the translators up front. I am the founder of The Correspondent, and I have to tell you up front, I'm going to probably say a few things that are considered rude to say on a journalism conference. I can't help it. I am Dutch. We are considered rude. We are also considered cheap. If you don't believe me, just Google going Dutch. Sorry about that. So The Correspondent. We call ourselves an antidote to the daily news grind. That is our slogan, and it has been for 5 years. And that's probably the unique selling point we have and why people sign up for us. We are not the news. And I could talk hours why we are not the news. And we don't consider ourselves to be in the news business, because news is a terrible product. News is a terrible product. News fundamentally misleads our audiences about what goes on around in the world. Now, I'm not talking about journalism. It's not the same as news. But when regular folks, non-journalists, think about journalism, they often think about the daily news grind, the thing that is tiring and misleading. and we get just fed up by it. Now, what's wrong with news? News, generally speaking, almost always is about the most sensational exceptions to the rule. That's the basic premise of news. If it's exceptional, if it's sensational, if it catches your eye, then it will be in the news. Now, if you see the world through the prism of news alone, at the end of the day, you will exactly understand how the world doesn't work. This came to me after working for a couple of years in journalism. I've been in journalism for 15 years, and I've grown to hate the news myself as much as most of the public does. Nobody watches the news for fun. Nobody even trusts most of the general news anymore. That's our biggest fundamental problem we have in journalism. The core product doesn't breed trust. It breeds distrust, and it breeds cynicism. It also breeds powerlessness. People feel disengaged with democracies. And I'm not talking about fake news. Fake news is a problem all in itself. But the real news is even worse. I don't know if you... who saw the movie The Big Short? Or read the book, by the way? Nobody read the book. Okay. I saw the movie, and the thing that's... It's about the guy who saw the housing crisis in the United States. He shorted on it. He went short on it, betting against the housing market when it was booming in 2007, and then saw it crash, made billions of dollars. Now, the thing that struck me most about that movie is there was one source of information he kept deliberately ignoring, which was the daily news, stock market prices, the current events that were going on every day. News is about what happens today, never about what happens every day. We should focus more on what happens every day, because that shapes our society and our lives. As we call it, news is about the weather. If you want to know what to wear tomorrow, watch the news. But we need to cover the climate as well. There are structures governing our societies that explain to you why these current events are happening. And we need to inform people about those as well. Now, I mean this metaphorically. We have a climate change correspondent who writes about climate change every day. But we use this metaphor for almost everything we do. It's not about events. It's about structures. And we do so being ad-free. Best decision we've ever made. We've been ad-free since the beginning. And it frees us up from selling our audience to third-party businesses. This is how it looks. We don't have the muck yet. Working on it. We're completely digital. We are responsive. You can follow us on every platform you would like. And we got started by crowdfunding. No investors, no banks, no loans, just people. And we set a world record in journalism crowdfunding. We raised $1.7 million in 8 days. From almost 19,000 people in a country that has almost 17 million people. So about like the size of New York. And, well, this is the text I wrote to my co-founder. 50% in 24 hours. Unbelievable, it says. And we've grown ever since, steadily, every day. About 30 or 40 new paying members sign up. We have 82% of people staying after a year. They pay 60 euros a year or 6 euros a month, and we employ 47 people. We reach about 2 million people in the Netherlands every month, and we also write books. Those are the end products of our longer series of articles on our website. We published 5 books, sold over 100,000 copies, all of them national bestsellers. And the key part is involving readers into your journalism. That's the most important part. Not just by engaging them or getting them to comment on something or like something, really involving them. Because 1,000 of your readers, maybe they're doctors or teachers or patients in hospitals, they know more than one journalist. And this treasure of knowledge, this is the biggest untapped resource of knowledge and expertise we as journalists have. And we can untap it now because we're online. And I put this in because this was in the New York Times and the Washington Post 2 days ago. We had a big scoop. that all started with this call out. All our series of stories start out with call outs, very specifically, for example, to Shell employees. If you work at Shell, please help us research this. This is our correspondent climate change, and by collaborating with readers who worked at Shell, a couple of hundred signed up, we unearthed the Shell tapes that documented how Royal Dutch Shell, the oil company, knew about climate change since 1986 and has been frustrating action to do something about it ever since. This is the tape they used internally to warn their own employees about the dangers of climate change 30 years ago. We got this from readers. This is our guru, Jay Rosen, tweeting about it. We also collaborate with members in other ways. So, for example, we did the largest group interview with refugees through our members. We asked members, find a refugee who came to the Netherlands recently, and ask him the questions we want to ask for us. Almost 500 people did so, and we did the biggest group interview. And we got a sense of what daily life for refugee in the Netherlands looks like. Wrote a whole series of stories, also had translated it for the people who we interviewed. So a big part of this conversation goes on our platform itself. So we call it the contribution section, not the comment section. We don't want comments. Comments are opinions. We want what you know. No. So that's every story on the correspondent ends with questions that the correspondent wants to discuss. And we obligate our journalists to speak back, talk back. 50% of their time goes into conversing with members on a daily basis. It's not a side job, it is your job. And people can also fill in their expertise titles. You see below the name, the expertise title. We verify those titles so we know you're a doctor or a teacher or something else. And then these readers become ambassadors. We don't have a paywall. If you go to the correspondent, then you have to sign up. You have to become a paying member to see everything we do. But members can share everything we do without any limits. On top of the articles, it says, this article has been given to you by paying member, and then the name of the member. There's a unique link, so people know somebody paid for this. And my time is running up. Also, very important, have designers and developers in your highest ranks. Design and development is very important. If you judge websites, if they're trustworthy, the first thing people look at is, what does it look like? So we teamed up with a great design studio who built and designed everything. This handsome man is our creative director. And the word there is rust, which means, oh, now I forgot the English word, oh my God. Calm. He creates calm. Because news is hyped, we are calm. So one thing we did, for example, design-wise, is we took out all the links. Links distract you. Links point you towards things that you don't know where you're going. So we put the links with context next to the stories. Side notes, we call them. And we explain the link, why we want you to go there or why you might want to read that. We also have context buttons that explain certain words. And the readers are our most important stakeholders. They pay us. They're the only payers, and we work for them. We don't want their attention for attention's sake. There's 68% of our revenue is member subscription. We don't actually use the word subscription. 2% is donations, 5% is speakers agency, and we also sell books. It's becoming a bigger part of our business. Almost there. And now we want to go here. Because Dutch is a very small language, 21 million people speak it. We want to be in English, and we hope to launch, again with the crowdfunding, at the end of this year. So if you like to help us or like to know more, please reach out. I am available here, of course, and also through Twitter. Thank you so much.
Well, thanks to all four of you. I think you see we're going to have a very interesting conversation. I'd like to invite all four of you to come up and join us here on the panel. I have a couple questions to get us started, but if you have a burning question you want to get in line for the microphone, I will call on you. I think this is a pretty good demonstration of how reader donations, between the subscription panel and the panel we just heard, reader donations are such an important and growing factor in the important revenue that media need to produce. But I think we're also moving now into a conversation that'll go beyond that into some of the other things as well. All of you talked about multiple revenue, or at least maybe I'll start with you, April, talking about multiple revenue sources. Have you ever enumerated how many revenue sources you have at the Texas Tribune?
Well, I shared at first probably the largest segments, everything from foundations to corporations, members, and individual givers. But yeah, we have probably 10 different revenue streams, and the 10th is I call other, which I think is super interesting. And that's everything from, rideshare roundups and different opportunities that don't require a lot of heavy lifting, but bring revenue to the Texas Tribune.
Yeah.
So Speakers Bureau is another one. I run that. Our guys were out representing the brand all the time. It takes a lot of time out of the newsroom and to prepare and present. And Evan Smith came to me and said, will you run the Speakers Bureau? And it was really the last thing I wanted to do, is be a calendar keeper. And I said, I'll do it on one condition. And he said, what's that? And I said, I will do it if you allow me to give sponsor benefits. And that way we can form a relationship with these great organizations that are asking y'all to speak. And he says, okay, do what you want to do. And now it's turned into a $250,000 business for us. And the beauty, and that's just on the speaking fee alone. I mean, if we went and looked at the data on the relations that it's built ongoing, it's pretty amazing. So you just have to be creative.
$250,000 here, $250,000 there. Pretty soon it's more revenue. At Summer Media, we found all these different ways. We kind of found two paths. One of them is, driving a lot of audience and either getting a lot of subscription and donors from that, or that's where advertising starts to really come in, or a more loyal audience that will give you donations, will come to events, will hire you for the services you offer. You are fiercely anti-advertising, Rob. Tell me why you reject that completely.
Wow. When I first talking about that 5 years ago, especially here, then the next question always was, are you a communist? No, I'm not.
They were just trying to get you to sign up.
Yes. Advertising, well, first of all, it distracts literally. So we love the fact that we are a distract-free platform. And also simply puts another stakeholder in your business model. There's nothing really inherently wrong with ads, but the fact that we just don't have to think or have to put any energy in thinking of how do we please third-party businesses with the attention of our readers just frees up all the time to focus on those readers themselves. It's not that there's all kinds of indirect influence from ads that go into the journalism. No journalist will listen to an advertiser and say, oh, I'm going to write literally what he's saying. But clickbait, sensational headlines, seeing it as an attention game instead of informing people. That all is gone if you just are very principled about it. No ads, no sponsors, no sponsored content, etc.
I want to jump in just real
quick.
Please. I think it's all about the advertisers, the sponsors that you bring to your site. I mean, at the Texas Tribune, I see our sponsors as resources of great information. And I'm not trying to compete with our team's content. It's amazing. It's the gold. It's why people are there. I just want our offerings to be compatible with that and also create really a greater experience because, for example, I mentioned before we do tons of events. Other people come to our events and they say, we want these people at our events too. And so we build event marketing campaigns for them. And we find that, yes, it works and our people fill their rooms and they're happy and it's great. But without them being able to market to our audience, those people would never know that those event opportunities even exist. So I think it really has to do with how you're connecting your sponsors or your advertisers with your content and your brand.
Absolutely. Christina, I want you to jump in here. You, when you were at the Voice of San Diego, I think really helped champion a shared resource between the Texas Tribune and Voice of San Diego. And I know it comes down to the customer relationship management system they use that really helps drive those small donors into the bigger and bigger. And we're talking about people who start at $10 or $20 a month and end up making $10,000, $20,000, $50,000 and more contributions. You don't have to set a limit. How do you get people to move that, and talk a little bit about how you share that person?
So we share a database director. Her name is Anna. She is a Salesforce wizard. And I think, I think all of our clients in the Texas Tribune, we're really grateful to have somebody like that. And it, comes down to economy of scale, and that's one of the reasons why we created the hub. If multiple organizations are able to share a resource, it can go that much farther. If, Anna is making an investment or an update in Salesforce, that means 15, 16 organizations get to benefit from that. But for organizations that don't have this, great person, there's still a lot of great examples of people who will go out on their own and try to find their own resources and try to learn the work. So, yeah.
It's great. And Anna is a displaced Texan, so that helps. For us, our original CRM was not great. It was clunky. The sales team kind of went rogue at the Texas Tribune. We wanted Salesforce. Everybody said you can't afford it. Our operating partner, she did some research and found out as a nonprofit, you can apply for a grant to use Salesforce for free. And so we did it. And we did it kind of on the sly. And then we started to understand the power of Salesforce. And the whole company came together and decided that this was the way to go. And we tried to get a person in Texas, and we couldn't find anyone as great as Anna. And it's been wonderful because where Voice of San Diego was super powerful and successful, those was areas that we could learn from them, and hopefully we brought success your way as well through this relationship.
I think that's a wonderful model for others. If your media company isn't big enough to have a full-time person supporting everybody, keeping track of everybody else, shared resources can be a really powerful way to go. We have a question from the audience. Please, come on down.
Hi there. Jonathan Gross from Drury University. And I just wanted to thank you for your transparency and all the information and insights you're willing to share with us, because it's very valuable. I wondered if you had done a demographic breakdown of your membership, to see if you're missing any segments of your community, and what are you doing to reach out to those segments that don't seem to be participating in the memberships?
Great question, April and Christina. I think both of you can.
The data that we've been collecting is related to news consumption habits and more around who is opening what newsletters and how frequently and their engagement. I think for some of the local news organizations, you can track, by region or geography and see if the editorial content is aligning with what you could really tap into. I used to run the events program there, and we would use events as a vehicle to market ourselves to neighborhoods that we didn't have a strong presence in. So, but as far as data goes, not necessarily what you traditionally might think of, like age, gender, this sort of thing, but news consumption habits.
Go ahead, Rob.
Well, no, I'm going to probably give a different answer, because we don't collect demographics at all. We have in our founding principles, we have a privacy principle. We don't want to know your age or your location or how much you read us. We want to know what you know, and that's where the platform comes in. But we don't sell. That's one other reason why we don't sell ads, because then it becomes interesting. Like, is this the group 20 to 28-year-olds who have these and these incomes or stuff like that? If you don't have ads, you're really not that interested in that. So we only collect the data we legally are obliged to collect, and that's it. And let's face
that you mean payment information?
Like payment information, and for example, email, and so username, password, stuff like that. so they can log in, but not on what kind of group do we think you belong to. It states in our founding principles, we see you as curious individuals, not as part of some demographic.
And we take a very similar approach that we collect the absolute minimum amount of data during the sign-up process just to make it as easy as possible. And we find if the news organizations are trying to increase their impact with certain communities, it's much more subjective. So it's not about necessarily data collection on their audience. It's about looking like, where's the biggest impact with particular stories and what topic areas are they covering. So it's much more open-ended rather than hard data. Yeah.
I was just interested in it because in our community in Springfield, Missouri, what we find is that you have a group of people, I don't even want to call it elite, but there's a group of movers and shakers that participate in all of the community issues in that conversation, and it doesn't spread beyond that group. And I'm just wondering how, in this membership model, how do you reach out to those people that, like with the events, I like the idea of going to different parts of neighborhoods you might be missing, but I'm just wondering, when I saw that picture of one of the Texas Tribune events, it just struck me as it seemed a little homogenous, and I just wondered do you feel like you're hitting everybody you need to hit with the news events, the free events, and with the content on your website? Are you getting enough of everybody?
So for us, I mean, it comes down to also how you opt in and how you're self-selecting, because people come to the Texas Tribune Trent by way, a lot of times, of content. So if you're interested in public education or immigration issues, and we've started just recently a Facebook group, which has been quite successful really quickly. And in fact, our engagement officer, Facebook is trying to figure out from her how we build success so quickly in this type of engagement. And we're really listening to them, and some of the issues are kind of floating up, and then we're theming conversations around that. And our hope now is through engagement, that's what will lead to membership, email opt-in, getting more engaged with our brand, and then becoming a member.
Thank you so much for that question. If there are other questions in the audience or somebody wants to jump in with an example of how they share a resource or another magical way they're making money, please approach one of the microphones. Any of you got a burning question for each other? Alex, tell us a little bit about how Press Patron plays with other advertising things on the page, how you manage the different design elements on the page. I saw you're kind of discreetly at the top and bottom, but talk a little bit about how you play with ad tracking services and things like that.
So it's up to the individual publisher. So some of our sites are completely ad-free, and I think that works really well for them and their mission. Others use Press Patron as part of like a pretty broad repertoire of different business models. So they might have sponsored sections, or they might have overall site sponsorship, and they try to make sure that those businesses or organizations really align with their values. And the ones that do it most successfully completely disconnect it from the editorial content. But yeah, so each site takes a different approach. Some have sponsored subsections, some have conventional display advertising. But what we do find is like the articles that might typically perform really well from a metrics perspective with display advertising, they're not the ones that are getting the highest number of donations in terms of the impact they're having with their community of readers. I think by shifting towards this sort of economics of generosity and trying to tap into that, it's really helping convert the mindset of news organizations. So it's changing, what are the incentive structures? Are you being driven by arbitrary metrics of audience size, or are you actually trying to figure out what your readers care about?
Excellent. There are many different ways to generate revenue on your sites, and I think design has a pretty powerful influence on that. Rob, you spoke about that really brilliantly, how you've streamlined your design, how you've moved the links to the little comments. I love that. Anybody else seen design make a difference? Anything else you'd want to add, Rob, about how design drives people to donations, gets people more engaged?
Well, there has been quite some research that one of the main things people judge information on, and you do yourself, like think about how you, if you see a conspiracy website, like you immediately can tell, right, by the design or the weird letter
It's all the
fonts or-
strings and photos.
Right.
And
So design has to be like an integral part of your communication strategy, and also about our sense is design should be focused on how do we foster trust, and also how do we align the kind of design we do with the kind of journalism we want to do. So everything in our journalism is about context. So our design is also about providing context to everything we do. Also, we are a very personalized platform. So you can see all our correspondents and everybody who works at the correspondent personally. We have drawings of them you can relate to. That's also design kind of thinking. So yeah, and don't see design as an afterthought. Like in journalism, it's still very common to think of the story, write the story, and then have some designers or maybe even some developers come in, right? Present it. If you start with the designers and the developers, you'll get very different perspectives on how to tell a story, how to present a story, etc.
Great answer.
Go ahead. Coming back in terms of donations and membership campaigns, I think one of the key elements of your design should be ubiquity, so that there are multiple touch points across your site, and so that readers can discover it in a very natural way. I think some sites make the mistake of pursuing short-term gain. They might use bright yellow text and very intrusive page elements that kind of scream about their campaign, and it might result in a little bit of uptick, but the regular feedback we get from supporters is they get very annoyed by that. It might result in high churn rates. And the positive feedback that we get about the more subtle approach is that people feel a lot more empowered. They kind of converted naturally when they felt it was right, and they didn't feel like they were being begged. They felt like they were becoming part of the community.
very interesting. If you've got a answer you want to, sure, and then we'll take the questions from the audience.
I really love the slide that you have about investing in development and developers and designers. I mean, if you're a digital news organization, digital is a core part of your identity, and there's just not enough investment in the infrastructure behind it. So if you're thinking about how you're going to get a casual reader to become an email subscriber to actually make it into your pipeline, you know, if you want to add in a plugin or something and your website is old and it hasn't been updated in years, like you don't even have a chance to compete at that level. So it's really important to constantly be investing in your website as much as the content itself.
Right. And also at the back end. So do the tools do what you want to do? So we early on, from the beginning, we decided we want to build our own CMS, because there are a lot of content management systems out there, but they're publishing oriented, right? They're pushing stories. And we wanted to have something more like a community management system where the conversation with journalists and readers is central to the whole tool. So it takes a lot of money and resources, but it's worth it, because every time we add a new feature that helps us do the journalism we want to do, it makes up for it.
Are you considering licensing that to other newsrooms or media organizations in journalism?
Yeah, we are. It works for us, but we don't feel comfortable licensing it yet because it's just not good enough. We can't service it well enough. We hope, like in somewhere between 6 and 12 months, we hope we'll get there. We only have 10 developers, which is not a lot. And especially to build a CMS like that, it's not nothing, actually.
Yeah.
And I suppose you'd also want to nurture their community and their strategy around how they use the tool, not just the technology, right?
Exactly. But at some point, we hope we could do that and foster membership models. We actually want it to be used for membership.
That's wonderful. I look forward to learning more about that. Let's get a question from the audience over here.
Hello. Hi. My name is Elena Carpio. I come from Venezuela. So Venezuela is a bit of an outlier, right? We're the first hyperinflation in the 21st century. There's currency exchange controls. So there are some endemic difficulties to maybe have a membership revenue stream. But I also wonder about culture. Is there a cultural dimension that maybe influences which revenue stream might appeal more to certain audiences depending on the region? And I realize that this is a very international panel. but also even for the Texas Tribune that might have a big Latino readership population. Is there a cultural dimension to it? And I'm also interested in Janine's answer because Latin America.
Muy bien, gracias por la pregunta. Venezuela is a complicated market, but I have seen, some of the sites that I've worked in Venezuela started with a crowdfunding campaign that brought money from the U.S. and Venezuela, from the people who have left the country and sometimes have more money to bring back. And I know bringing it into the country is its own challenge, but I've seen some creative ways around that we can talk a little bit about afterwards. Why don't you guys go ahead and jump in and talk a little bit about the culture of donation, and if you're in a place where there's not a common culture of giving. In many of the Latin American countries we work with, that's something I hear from people. People aren't used to donating like in the U.S. They don't necessarily get tax deductions like in the U.S. If you have any insights about how you motivate people in the absence of some of those incentives, that might be helpful to her as well.
So for me, I'll jump in and say that Tribune, we really look at the population of Texas and the diversity of it and look to reflect that. An example is most of our population lives in urban areas, and so we've opened an urban market bureau in Dallas to cover that. And at the same time, you don't want to overlook anyone because people who live outside the major markets, they have the same vote as we do here in Austin. So we're looking, it's really more from a kind of a solutions journalism kind of aspect, and so this November, we'll travel to College Station and do a 2-day event about the future of rural, really kind of looking at life in rural Texas and finding models to share, across those counties that help everybody. And so I think it's that, but it's also about the diversity of your own newsroom and company and kind of understanding exactly where people are coming from, the stories that they are, looking for, the questions they need to be answered. We hired a community reporter. I think we were like the rest of the media after the presidential election. We kind of missed it. And so we look at journalism today as just not, top down, but now from the community up. And so we're listening more to the communities around Texas and listening to their questions. And that's driving a lot of our content.
You spoke about the very specific wording, about really walking people through. Something I actually saw from one of your colleagues, if you've never watched, and I recommend this to everybody that I work with in independent digital media, the crowdfunding video by Efecto Cocuyo in Venezuela, which has 2 women journalists talking about how there's a problem in the country. News is not getting out. Most of traditional media has been co-opted by the government, and there's a lack of news in our community. And it sets up the problem very well. And then it says, we are willing to do something about this, and it shows them in the street, talking to people, taking action, working on stories, cuts to some good black and white photos that shows the kind of work they do. And then in the end it says, well, we can't do it without your help. And I think if there's a way to ask for support and something I can teach to journalists, my experience with a lot of journalists is they either feel like they should never ask for money or support, or they feel like they should kind of desperately make a plea. Like, please help us or we'll die. And in my experience, people are more likely to support you if you do what Luzmeli Reyes and Laura Weffer did and say, there's a problem, we know it's a problem, it affects your life, we think we can solve it with your help, but we need your help to do it well, join us. That message I have seen work. And that video, which is about 2.5 minutes long and has English subtitles if anybody wants to see it, is on Efecto Cocuyo in their About Us page and also on the Summer Media website in the directory for them. So any other messages you've heard that really help move that needle?
Well, I totally agree. Like, safe journalism doesn't work. A lot, like...
It only works for journalists.
Yeah,
and
we
most of
are
us don't have enough money to save you.
Talking to yourself.
We are interested in saving our jobs, but not many people are. They want value out of it. But to come to the question that was from the audience earlier, I could give you the Dutch culture, where subscriptions have always been a key part of, because we're such a small country, so newspaper subscriptions were very common. You could deliver newspapers all over the country fairly easily. So that might help. in turning people from newspaper subscribers to digital members or subscribers. But I do think, if you there's a universal kind of reason why people sign up and pay for journalism is when it just speaks to their concerns, their actual real concerns, and those concerns are not very hard to think of because we're all human beings. So, and we pretty much, generally, we disagree on a lot of things, but we care a lot about the same things: justice, fairness, health, treating others equally. So if you can somehow fit those more or less human values into your journalism at every space and point you can, you're going to get people wanting to support you or pay for it. It's not a algorithm thing. We have a great algorithm for 10,000 of years. It's called our moral compass, right? That's a great algorithm. We should listen to it way more often, I think.
That's wonderful.
I'd like to share at the Tribune, and this goes back to events and also just sharing content in real time. But I don't know how many of y'all remember the Wendy Davis filibuster. If you saw that anywhere on the planet, it's because the Texas Tribune was there live streaming it. And what we learned, I think Rodney Gibbs is in the audience today, is he championed a Kickstarter campaign for the Texas Tribune because we realized the power of real-time media. And so we went out there, we told everyone that this is exactly what we need. We want to start live streaming all of our events. Texas is a big place and we travel all over the place. And people suffer from time poverty. They're not going to travel with us everywhere. But if they want to experience these news moments in real time, then we ask for them to invest in us.
Yeah.
And they did. It was amazing. We went way past our goal. And then beyond that, my understanding too is the companies, the technology companies, wanted to support us as well. And so they kicked in. And it's incredible. And
April, I just have to compliment you for saying invest, not give, not donate. I mean, we are talking about donations, and I've heard that word a lot, but when you talk about investing in news, I think you take it to another place. We have time for one last question from the audience.
R.B. Brenner, the director of the Journalism School here. Question for Rob. I really like your idea of having people be contributors, not commenters. But can you talk to people about sort of the practical level of that? Because if you do get 100 doctors, I used to be an editor at the Washington Post, and I think if we tried that model, we would be overwhelmed, and people might get cynical of like, I gave you information, you never followed up. How do you just manage that?
It's a great question. That's a great challenge. But it's luckily it's a more of a design and development challenge than anything else. Just because 200 or 300 comments are overwhelming right now doesn't mean in a couple of years we can have like new tools to manage such input. But that is absolutely a challenge, especially when you get a lot of reader response and like the people who are most involved. They want an answer. They want an answer now, right? And if you don't answer them at all, or just give them an automated response, or you give them a response weeks later, they get annoyed. They said, I was interacting, I was involved, and you're not taking me seriously. So we are thinking a lot about building tools to make that process easier. So for example, we make in our backend, we make a Rolodex of people, doctors, teachers, historians, whatever. And we try to involve them in different ways. So it's not just sending you a comment or sending you an email. It's also read along with us or proofread in this Google Doc. Or we also explicitly try to make explicit what kind of response is best for us. So for example, we write posts like, this is the kind of email we would read or we would like.
Wow.
Instead of just
asking an open question.
Asking an open question. The more specific your questions are, the easier manageable the responses get.
Great. Fantastic answer. I want to thank Alex from Past Patron, Christina from the News Revenue Hub, April from Texas Tribune, and Rob from Correspondent. We'll all be around this week. I'm sure you'll get a chance to talk.
This was an awesome panel. We have lunch now, but we have also the Google Tools for Journalists workshop. There are 2 workshops, one in English and one in Spanish. So if you pre-registered for that, you can go to the workshop now. If you have not and you want to, the delicious buffet at the AT&T Conference Center is just a walk one block from here. So you can get together and enjoy the buffet because it's very good. Or enjoy the lunchbox and work hard at the Google Tools for Journalists workshop.